SpongeBob SquarePants seems like an innocent cartoon on the surface, but fans have uncovered some genuinely disturbing theories about what's really going on in Bikini Bottom. From the dark truth behind the Krusty Krab's secret formula to horrifying explanations for the characters' behaviors, these theories will completely change how you see the show. In this video, we're going to explore the most disturbing SpongeBob theories and determine which ones actually hold water. Stick around to discover the dark lore that might be hiding beneath your favorite childhood cartoon. Make sure to subscribe to our channel. Alright guys, let's talk about what might be the darkest SpongeBob theory ever, the nuclear testing theory. So basically, Bikini Bottom is sitting right where the US dropped real nuclear bombs, and all that radiation mutated normal sea creatures into the talking characters we see today. You know how SpongeBob can flip burgers and drive a boat? Or how Patrick walks around like a person instead of just being a blob on the ocean floor? Nuclear radiation can make animals do some really weird stuff. So back in 1946, the US government decided to test atomic bombs on this place called Bikini Atoll. They basically picked this random island in the Pacific and started blowing it up with nukes. And here's the crazy part, that's exactly where Bikini Bottom is supposed to be located. The creators literally named SpongeBob's home after the place where nuclear bombs were tested. They're telling us something with that choice. Think about all the weird stuff these characters do. Crabs run restaurants, starfish wear clothes and have jobs, squirrels live underwater in glass bubbles, animals that got exposed to radiation can end up doing some pretty bizarre things. Now here's where it gets really messed up. Remember that huge explosion at the end of Dying for Pi? The one that destroys everything? That's actual footage from a real nuclear bomb test that happened at Bikini Atoll. They literally used real nuke footage in a kid's show. Some animator grabbed footage of an actual atomic bomb going off underwater, the same kind of bomb that would have contaminated everything living in that area, and they made it into a joke about pie. The bomb test they used was called Baker, and it was nasty. They set it off 90 feet underwater, and it shot this massive radioactive water column up into the air. If you're living on the ocean floor when that happens, you're basically getting nuked. The real Bikini Atoll story is pretty sad. The US military told the 167 people living there, hey, we need your island for a while, and moved them somewhere else. That was almost 80 years ago, and they still can't go home because it's still too radioactive. But look at SpongeBob's world. These sea creatures are walking around, talking, working jobs, driving cars. If their DNA got scrambled by nuclear fallout, suddenly all this weird behavior makes sense. What's really wild is how happy everyone is. These characters might be living in what's basically a nuclear wasteland, but they're having the best time ever. They built this whole fun society in a place that got bombed with atomic weapons. The creators totally knew what they were doing. They could have set the show anywhere in the ocean, but they picked the exact spot where nukes went off. Then they used actual nuclear footage in an episode. They're basically telling us this is about nuclear testing. And here's something crazy. Real animals near nuclear disaster sites do show weird changes. Scientists find creatures that act different, look different, sometimes even seem smarter. Sound familiar? The scariest part is that they're so used to their radioactive world that they don't even know how messed up it is. This is just normal life for them now. Look at Mr. Krabs. This guy is obsessed with money like it's his whole personality. If radiation scrambled his brain, maybe being obsessed with shiny round things makes perfect sense. Or SpongeBob, he's like the happiest person ever. What if that's how his mutated brain deals with living in a contaminated place? Maybe being super optimistic is just how he copes. Dying for Pi becomes way darker when you realize they're showing footage from the event that created their world. The show is saying, here's what made us, and then laughing about it. That's pretty twisted. These characters survive stuff that should totally kill them. SpongeBob gets blown up all the time and just walks it off. Maybe nuclear-powered sponges can do that. The real Bikini Atoll got hit with 23 nuclear bombs over 12 years. That's over a decade of turning a beautiful island into a radioactive mess. Everything got contaminated, the water, the coral, the fish, everything. When they finally let people try to move back in the 70s, they had to leave again because everything was still dangerous. The coconuts were radioactive, the water was poisoned, but somehow in SpongeBob's world, everything's totally fine. Maybe that's the point though. Even in the worst situation ever, even in a place that got nuked over and over, life found a way to survive and be happy. These characters turned a nuclear testing site into a place full of friendship and fun. But it's still a nuclear testing site. Every joke happens where atomic bombs went off. Every Krabby Patty gets made in what used to be a radioactive crater. The characters might forget what happened before, but the place sure remembers. This theory basically makes SpongeBob a post-apocalyptic story disguised as a kid's cartoon. These are nuclear survivors living in the ruins of their old world, somehow staying positive about everything. And here's the really messed up part: every time a kid watches SpongeBob, they're seeing what happened after nuclear weapons testing. They're watching characters who only exist because humans decided to drop atomic bombs in their backyard. The nuclear testing theory explains all the weird stuff in the show. Why do these animals act like humans? Radiation. Why can they survive impossible things? Radiation. Why is their world so bizarre? Because it's built on top of a nuclear testing ground. These characters have gotten so used to their radioactive reality that weird mutations are just normal Tuesday stuff for them. Walking starfish? Cool. Talking crabs? Sure. Living in a nuclear wasteland? Just another day in Bikini Bottom. They've made the totally abnormal seem totally normal. Here's another thing that'll blow your mind: the show constantly references explosions and destruction like it's no big deal. How many times does something blow up in SpongeBob? How many times do characters get completely destroyed and just bounce back? Maybe that's because they're already living in the aftermath of the biggest explosions ever created by humans. And think about Gary the Snail. He's probably the most normal character in the show, right? He just meows like a cat and acts like a pet. But real snails don't meow. They don't have the vocal cords for it. So even Gary, the most normal character, shows signs of radiation-induced mutation. The food in Bikini Bottom is another weird thing. They're constantly eating stuff that makes no sense: underwater hamburgers, ice cream, hot soup. But if you're living in a contaminated environment, maybe your taste buds and digestive system got so messed up that you can eat literally anything, and it tastes good. Plankton is especially interesting when you think about this theory. He's this tiny organism that somehow has the intelligence to build robots and create elaborate schemes. Normal plankton are basically just floating specks. But radiation can cause massive changes in brain development. Maybe Plankton's intelligence is the result of his microscopic brain getting supercharged by nuclear fallout. The show also has this weird thing where technology works underwater. Computers, cars, campfires, none of this should function on the ocean floor. But in a post-nuclear world, maybe the laws of physics got a little scrambled too. Maybe the radiation changed how everything works, making impossible things suddenly possible. And here's something really dark: the characters seem to have no memory of life before their current situation. They act like Bikini Bottom has always been this way. Maybe the radiation didn't just change their bodies, but also wiped their memories clean. They're living in the aftermath of nuclear testing, but they can't remember what came before. Sandy Cheeks is particularly telling. She's a land mammal living underwater, which is completely insane, but she makes it work with her air dome and diving suit. Maybe she represents the few surface dwellers who adapted to the new radioactive underwater world. Or maybe she's a scientist studying the effects of nuclear contamination on marine life. The nuclear testing theory turns every innocent moment in the show into something much darker. Every laugh, every friendship, every Krabby Patty is happening in the shadow of nuclear devastation. These characters have built something beautiful out of something terrible, but the terrible thing is still there underneath it all. Let's talk about another theory that changes how you see the entire show. Squidward's hearing damage theory suggests that Squidward could actually play clarinet beautifully until the Bubble Stand episode, where a massive bubble explosion damaged his hearing and ruined his musical abilities forever. Ever wonder why Squidward sounds so terrible when he plays clarinet? Most people just assume he's bad at music and leave it at that. But what if there's a much darker reason behind his awful playing? What if Squidward was actually a talented musician who lost everything in a single moment? In the very early episodes of SpongeBob, we see a completely different side of Squidward's musical abilities. During Bubble Stand, which is only the second episode of the entire series, Squidward is shown playing his clarinet in his house. But here's the thing that most people miss at the beginning of this episode: Squidward is actually playing well. The transcript shows he's practicing soothing sounds from Squidward's clarinet, and he's confident about his abilities. This episode shows us Squidward at his musical peak before everything goes wrong. He's practicing seriously, he believes in his talent, and there's no indication that he's the terrible musician we know from later episodes. He's genuinely trying to create beautiful music in the peace and quiet of his own home, but then SpongeBob shows up with his bubble stand, and everything changes forever. Throughout the episode, SpongeBob keeps making noise and disrupting Squidward's practice sessions. SpongeBob starts blowing these elaborate bubbles using his ridiculous technique, and one of them, a massive elephant-shaped bubble, floats directly into Squidward's house and explodes right inside. The explosion is violent enough that bubble residue comes pouring out of both of Squidward's windows, and there's even an elephant trumpet sound effect when it pops. That's a pretty intense explosion happening right where Squidward is sitting with his clarinet, but this is just the beginning of the damage. Later in the episode, Squidward gets frustrated with SpongeBob and Patrick and decides to show them how bubble blowing is really done. He goes through SpongeBob's entire ridiculous technique and then screams into the bubble wand with all his anger and frustration. This creates an absolutely massive bubble that's completely out of control. Here's where the real damage happens. This giant bubble comes back and completely engulfs Squidward's entire house. The bubble lifts his house right out of the ground and carries it high into the air. Then, while Squidward is trapped inside this massive bubble, it explodes with what the episode describes as explosive force. Think about what that means for someone's hearing. Squidward is essentially sitting inside a giant balloon when it pops. Anyone who's ever been startled by a balloon popping right next to them knows how incredibly loud that sound is. Now, imagine being trapped inside a balloon the size of a house when it explodes. The pressure change and sound level would be absolutely devastating to human ears. The episode ends with Squidward's house floating back down to the ground and Squidward playing his clarinet again, but this time he's playing weakly. The transcript specifically says he starts playing his clarinet weakly. This is the first time we see his musical abilities diminished. From this episode forward, Squidward's clarinet playing becomes the running joke we all know. He sounds terrible, his music is painful to listen to, and nobody appreciates his performances. But what if this isn't because he lacks talent? What if it's because he literally can't hear himself properly anymore? Hearing damage can completely mess up your ability to distinguish pitch, tone, and rhythm. Musicians who suffer hearing damage often describe feeling like they're playing underwater or in a fog. They can't tell if they're hitting the right notes, they can't hear the subtle nuances that make music beautiful, and they lose their ability to self-correct. This would explain so much about Squidward's character in later episodes. He's desperately trying to recapture something he's lost. He keeps playing and practicing because he remembers being good, but he can't understand why everything sounds wrong now. He doesn't realize that the problem is that he literally can't hear what he's doing anymore. The tragedy becomes even deeper when you realize that Squidward probably doesn't understand what happened to him. In the world of SpongeBob, cartoon physics means that characters bounce back from explosions and injuries without lasting effects. Squidward might not even realize that the bubble explosion caused permanent damage. He just knows that somehow, mysteriously, his music doesn't sound right anymore. This theory reframes Squidward's entire character arc. He's someone who had genuine musical ability and lost it in a freak accident caused by his annoying neighbor. Every time he plays clarinet in later episodes, he's struggling with a disability he doesn't understand. It also makes SpongeBob's role in the story much darker. SpongeBob is the direct cause of Squidward's hearing damage. That massive bubble explosion happened because SpongeBob taught someone his dangerous bubble technique and encouraged them to use it recklessly. The timing of this episode makes the theory even more compelling. Bubble Stand is the second episode of the entire series, which means it establishes the baseline for how Squidward will behave for the rest of the show. If this is the episode where Squidward loses his hearing, then every single episode afterward shows us a character dealing with the aftermath of this injury. Look at how Squidward behaves in later episodes when it comes to music. He's incredibly defensive about his playing, he gets angry when people criticize him, and he seems genuinely confused about why nobody appreciates his art. This is the behavior of someone who can't understand why something that used to work doesn't work anymore. The Bubble Stand episode even shows us Squidward's descent in real time. At the beginning, he's confident and capable. By the end, after 2 major bubble explosions near his head, he's playing weakly. The show literally documents the moment when Squidward's musical abilities were damaged. This theory turns one of SpongeBob's longest running gags into something much more tragic. Every time Squidward plays clarinet and sounds terrible, we're not laughing at a bad musician, we're watching someone struggle with hearing damage that he doesn't understand. Every time SpongeBob complains about Squidward's playing, he's unknowingly mocking the disability he caused. The Squidward hearing damage theory suggests that the entire show is built on a foundation of tragedy that nobody talks about. Squidward is dealing with a life-changing injury that destroyed his passion and his talent. And the worst part is, nobody in Bikini Bottom understands what really happened to him. Be sure to subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying the video. Now let's dive into one of the most unsettling theories about SpongeBob. The post-apocalyptic theory suggests that Bikini Bottom exists in a post-nuclear wasteland where survivors adapted to live underwater, which explains why characters can somehow breathe air and use fire beneath the ocean. Ever notice how weird the physics are in SpongeBob's world? Like, really weird. We're talking about a place that's supposedly underwater, but characters can breathe air, start fires, cry tears, and even take showers. Most people just accept this as cartoon logic, but what if there's a much darker explanation? Tea at the Tree Dome is one of the most important episodes for understanding this theory because it shows us something that should be impossible. SpongeBob and Patrick, who live underwater, can actually breathe air when they're inside Sandy's tree dome. Sure, they struggle with it and start to dehydrate, but the fact that they can breathe air at all is pretty suspicious for creatures that are supposed to be fully aquatic. Think about what this episode is really showing us. SpongeBob enters an air-filled environment and his body starts to shut down, but he doesn't immediately die from lack of water. Instead, he slowly dehydrates like he's been removed from his natural habitat. But here's the thing, if SpongeBob was truly a sea creature, being in pure air should kill him instantly. Instead, his body seems to remember how to process air, even though it's clearly not his preferred environment anymore. The episode transcript shows SpongeBob saying things like, "air is good," and "I love air" when he first meets Sandy. But then when he actually experiences pure air, his body starts breaking down. This suggests that maybe SpongeBob's species used to breathe air, but they've adapted to an underwater environment out of necessity. The post-apocalyptic theory explains this by suggesting that Bikini Bottom is actually a refuge built after some kind of global catastrophe. The residents aren't naturally aquatic creatures, they're the descendants of surface dwellers who were forced underwater to survive. Over generations, they've adapted to their new environment, but they still retain some ability to process air. This would explain so many of the impossible things we see in the show. Characters can start campfires underwater because they're still using technology and knowledge from the surface world. They can cry tears and take showers because their bodies still function like terrestrial creatures. They can breathe air because they haven't completely lost that ability, they've just evolved to prefer water. The dehydration that SpongeBob and Patrick experience in Sandy's tree dome becomes way more disturbing when you think about it this way. They're not just fish out of water, they're post-apocalyptic survivors whose bodies are trying to remember how to live in the world their ancestors came from. The fact that they can survive in air at all suggests that the change from surface to underwater living happened relatively recently in evolutionary terms. Sandy becomes a really important character in this theory because she represents what the surface world used to be like. She's a land mammal who's adapted to live underwater, but she still maintains her connection to air. Her tree dome is a preserved piece of the pre-apocalyptic world. She's keeping the memory of surface life alive. The way Sandy talks about air in the episode is telling too. She says things like, "I gotta have my air," and treats her air helmet like it's essential for survival. But if the surface world was still habitable, why would one squirrel be living in an underwater dome? Maybe Sandy is one of the last surface dwellers, and she came to Bikini Bottom because everywhere else has been destroyed or contaminated. This theory also explains why Bikini Bottom has such a weird mix of technology. They have cars and televisions and telephones, but they're all adapted to work underwater. This suggests that the residents took surface technology with them when they moved underwater and modified it to work in their new environment. The nuclear testing connection we talked about earlier fits perfectly with this theory. Maybe the nuclear test at Bikini Atoll was the catastrophe that forced everyone underwater. The surface world became uninhabitable due to radiation, so the survivors built underwater cities to escape the contamination. Think about how characters in SpongeBob react to the surface world when they occasionally visit it. They don't treat it like an alien environment, they treat it like a place they have some familiarity with. SpongeBob knows what beaches are, or what air feels like, so what surface creatures look like. This suggests cultural memory of a time when his people lived on the surface. The fact that characters like Mr. Krabs have backstories involving surface activities like being in the Navy makes more sense if you assume that the Navy existed during the transition period. Maybe Mr. Krabs served during the time when surface navies were trying to deal with whatever catastrophe forced everyone underwater. The episode shows us that SpongeBob's body can adapt to air, but it takes effort and causes physical stress. This is exactly what you'd expect from creatures who used to be air-breathing, but have spent generations adapting to water. Their bodies retain the capability, but it's no longer their preferred state. Patrick's reaction in the tree dome is even more telling. He enters the air environment and immediately starts struggling, but he also shows signs of recognizing what's happening. He yells, "What kind of place is this?" Countered something familiar but wrong. Maybe his body is remembering something his conscious mind has forgotten. The water helmets that Sandy gives them at the end become symbols of how the post-apocalyptic world works. Surface dwellers like Sandy need air helmets to survive underwater, while underwater dwellers like SpongeBob need water helmets to survive in air. Both groups are living in environments that aren't quite natural for them anymore. This theory reframes the entire show as a story about adaptation and survival in a post-apocalyptic world. The characters are the descendants of disaster survivors who've built a new civilization underwater. Their weird hybrid of surface and underwater culture makes sense when you realize they're trying to preserve what they can remember of the world that was lost. The dehydration scene becomes a metaphor for what happens when post-apocalyptic survivors try to return to their original environment. SpongeBob's body is trying to remember how to live in air, but it's been too long, and the adaptation is too complete. He can survive in air, but he can't thrive there anymore. Every time fire works underwater, or characters breathe air, or any of the other impossible physics happen in the show, it's a reminder that this is a post-surface world that's been forced to adapt. The characters carry the memory of surface life in their bodies and their culture, but they can't go back to what they used to be. The post-apocalyptic theory suggests that SpongeBob is actually one of the most hopeful post-apocalyptic stories ever told. Instead of focusing on the disaster that destroyed the surface world, it shows us how survivors can build something beautiful and happy even in the worst circumstances. Bikini Bottom is a testament to how life finds a way to continue even after everything falls apart. Let's examine one of the most unsettling theories about the show. SpongeBob's guardian theory suggests that Squidward is actually being paid by SpongeBob's wealthy parents to watch over their mentally disabled son, which explains why he never actually moves away, despite the constant torment he endures. Ever wonder why Squidward puts up with so much abuse from SpongeBob? Like, really think about it. This guy gets tortured on a daily basis by his neighbor, but he never actually leaves. He complains constantly, threatens to move, and acts like he hates everything about living next to SpongeBob, but when push comes to shove, he always stays put. Opposite Day gives us one of the clearest examples of this weird dynamic. The episode starts with SpongeBob and Patrick throwing Squidward a surprise birthday party that he clearly doesn't want. They break into his house, wake him up, and force him to participate in activities he hates. Squidward gets so fed up that he decides to move out of Bikini Bottom entirely. But here's where it gets interesting. Squidward actually calls a real estate agent and sets up everything to sell his house. He's serious about leaving. He tells the agent he wants to move as soon as possible. He's taking real action to get away from SpongeBob and Patrick. The real estate agent warns him that bad neighbors can ruin a house sale, and Squidward gets worried. He knows SpongeBob and Patrick are going to mess this up for him, so he comes up with this elaborate plan to trick them into behaving on Opposite Day, hoping they'll act normal for once so he can sell his house and escape. The plan completely backfires. SpongeBob and Patrick end up pretending to be Squidward and basically destroy any chance of selling the house. The real estate agent gets so frustrated she storms out and refuses to help him. Squidward begs her not to leave him there, but she drives away anyway. And then what happens? Does Squidward try to find another real estate agent? Does he pack up and move somewhere else? Does he do anything to actually escape his situation? Nope. He just accepts it and stays right where he is, continuing to live next to the people who ruined his chance at freedom. This is where the Guardian theory starts making sense. If Squidward was just a regular neighbor who hated SpongeBob, he would have found a way to leave by now. He's clearly intelligent enough to figure out other options. He could move to a different part of Bikini Bottom, find a new job, or even just rent an apartment somewhere else. But he doesn't do any of that. The theory suggests that Squidward can't leave because he's being paid to stay. SpongeBob's parents, who are apparently wealthy enough to afford their own son a nice house and a steady job at the Krusty Krab, hired Squidward to be a live-in caretaker. His job is to watch over SpongeBob and make sure he doesn't get into too much trouble. This explains so much about their relationship. Squidward acts like he's trapped in his situation because he literally is. He can't just move away because that would mean abandoning his responsibilities. He gets frustrated with SpongeBob because dealing with him is his job, and it's a really difficult job that he's not particularly good at. Think about how SpongeBob behaves throughout the series. He shows signs of being mentally disabled, or at least having some kind of developmental delay. He's extremely naive, has trouble understanding social cues, can't grasp basic concepts, and needs constant supervision. He's also incredibly trusting and vulnerable, which makes him an easy target for people who might want to take advantage of him. SpongeBob's parents probably realized their son needed someone to look after him, but they didn't want to put him in an institution. Instead, they set him up with his own house, got him a simple job, and hired Squidward to be his neighbor and unofficial guardian. They probably pay Squidward a salary to live next door and keep an eye on their son. This would explain why Squidward always seems to know where SpongeBob is and what he's doing. It would explain why he gets so upset when SpongeBob does dangerous or stupid things. It would explain why he never actually leaves, no matter how miserable he gets. It's not just that he's stuck with an annoying neighbor, he's stuck with a job he can't quit. The Opposite Day episode shows us what happens when Squidward tries to escape his responsibilities. He makes a genuine attempt to leave, but it fails spectacularly. The episode ends with him chasing SpongeBob and Patrick with a bulldozer. But this is a caretaker who's reached his breaking point because his charges have made his job impossible. Throughout the series, we see Squidward constantly trying to teach SpongeBob basic life skills, getting frustrated when SpongeBob doesn't understand simple concepts, and stepping in when SpongeBob is about to do something dangerous. This is the behavior of someone who feels responsible for another person's well-being. The theory also explains why Mr. Krabs keeps SpongeBob employed despite his many obvious problems. Mr. Krabs probably gets paid by SpongeBob's parents to give their son a job and keep him busy during the day. It's all part of the care plan they've set up for him. Squidward's constant complaining takes on a different meaning when you realize he might be a caregiver experiencing burnout. Taking care of someone with special needs is incredibly difficult. Squidward's frustration and exhaustion make perfect sense if this is his actual job. The most disturbing part of this theory is that Squidward might have been doing this for years without any real appreciation or recognition. He's sacrificing his own happiness and dreams to take care of someone else. But he can't even tell people what he's really doing because it would violate SpongeBob's privacy. Every time Squidward talks about wanting to be a famous artist or musician, it becomes tragic because he's giving up his real ambitions to be a caretaker. Every time he gets frustrated with SpongeBob, it's not just annoying neighbor drama, it's the stress of being responsible for another person's safety and well-being. The Guardian theory reframes the entire show as being about the relationship between a caregiver and his charge. SpongeBob is a vulnerable person who needs constant supervision. Squidward's someone who's been given an incredibly difficult job and is doing his best to handle it. This theory makes Opposite Day even more heartbreaking because it shows us Squidward's one real attempt to escape his situation, and we watch it fail completely. He's trapped and he knows it, and there's nothing he can do about it except keep doing his job and hope that someday things will get easier. Moving on, here's the Mr. Krabs soul-selling theory. Basically, Mr. Krabs has sold his soul multiple times to supernatural beings for money and business powers, which explains his unnatural obsession with cash and impossible success at making it. You ever wonder how Mr. Krabs can literally smell a penny from 3 blocks away? Or how he always knows exactly when someone's trying to rip him off? That's not normal crab behavior. There's actually a really dark explanation for his supernatural money abilities, and it's all revealed in the episode Money Talks. Most people watch this episode thinking it's just about Mr. Krabs wanting to chat with his cash. But if you pay attention to what actually happens, especially that insane ending, you'll realize the show is telling us something way more disturbing about Mr. Krabs' past. The whole thing starts when Mr. Krabs makes a deal with the Flying Dutchman to talk to money. He literally signs away his soul without even reading the contract. But here's where it gets crazy when the Flying Dutchman comes back to collect. At the end, he finds an IOU note instead of Mr. Krabs' actual soul. Then Mr. Krabs drops this bombshell he already sold his soul, and suddenly there's this whole line of supernatural creatures waiting to collect their piece, including monsters, demons, and even SpongeBob because Mr. Krabs was $5 short on payday. The show is literally telling us that Mr. Krabs has been chopping up his soul and trading it away for years. Think about it, how does a regular crab become the most successful businessman in all of Bikini Bottom? How can he detect the sound of money from impossible distances? How does he always know exactly what scam to pull next? These aren't normal abilities. Mr. Krabs has been making supernatural deals to get these powers. Every time he needed an edge in business, he probably sold another piece of his soul. Maybe one deal gave him the ability to smell money. Another might have given him those insane business instincts. Each transaction made him richer, but also more obsessed with wealth, because he's literally trading away pieces of his humanity. This explains why his greed is so extreme it's almost inhuman. Normal people can control their desire for money, but Mr. Krabs physically can't. It's not a character flaw, it's a supernatural curse that gets stronger every time he makes a new deal. He's compelled to be greedy because that's what these contracts turned him into. What's really messed up is how casual he is about the whole thing in money talks. When all these supernatural beings show up to collect, Mr. Krabs isn't scared or surprised. He's been managing multiple soul debts for years. He even has systems in place like the IOU trick, which means he's done this dance before. And SpongeBob being in that line, that's the darkest part. Mr. Krabs has been making deals with his own employees instead of paying them properly. He's literally trading pieces of his soul as wages. SpongeBob probably doesn't even understand what he's owed, he just knows Mr. Krabs owes him something supernatural. This theory also explains how Mr. Krabs survives all the crazy stuff that happens to him. He gets blown up, crushed, and destroyed constantly, but always bounces back. If his soul is scattered across multiple supernatural contracts, maybe different parts of him are protected by different entities, he can't fully die because too many creatures have claims on pieces of his soul. The really disturbing thing is that Mr. Krabs seems totally fine with this arrangement. He's not trying to get his soul back or break these contracts. Even in money talks, after seeing how miserable the talking money makes him, he still doesn't want to undo the deal. He's so addicted to supernatural wealth that he'll keep selling himself forever. This changes how you watch every other episode. When Mr. Krabs does something impossibly greedy or shows crazy business skills, it's not just comedy, it's the result of his soul-selling addiction. He's a creature that's traded away his crabness piece by piece to become the ultimate money-making machine. The Krusty Krab's success makes way more sense now, too. How does a place that basically just serves burgers dominate the entire restaurant scene in Bikini Bottom? Mr. Krabs probably made deals to make his food irresistible, to eliminate competition, to keep customers coming back no matter what. The restaurant's success is based on supernatural manipulation. What makes this even darker is thinking about what happens when all these entities want to collect at once. Mr. Krabs has made so many deals that there's not enough soul left to go around. This creates this supernatural debt crisis, where powerful beings are fighting over pieces of a soul that's already been sold like 10 times over. The episode ends with that line of creatures waiting, but we never see what happens next. Maybe that's because there is no resolution. Maybe Mr. Krabs is trapped in this endless cycle of making new deals to pay off old ones, selling more and more of himself until there's nothing left but pure greed walking around in a crab body. This theory turns Mr. Krabs from a funny, greedy guy into something way more tragic and horrifying. He's literally lost pieces of his soul to get it. Every time we laugh at his greed, we're actually laughing at a creature who sold his humanity away bit by bit, and who's gonna keep doing it until there's nothing left of the real Eugene Krabs. The scariest part? He probably doesn't even remember what he was like before all these deals. Each contract probably erased a little more of his original personality, replacing it with supernatural greed. The Mr. Krabs we see might not even be the same Krab who started making these deals. He might just be what's left after years of soul selling turned him into something else entirely. And here's what's really twisted: this episode proves that Mr. Krabs has been doing this for so long that he's got the whole system figured out. The IOU trick, the casual way he handles supernatural debt collectors, the fact that he's already lined up multiple buyers for his soul. This guy has turned soul selling into a business model. He's treating his own soul like inventory to be managed and distributed. Before we continue the video, be sure that you're subscribed to our channel. Now let's talk about Pearl's adoption theory. The idea that Mr. Krabs adopted Pearl after her whale parents disappeared, making him her surrogate father rather than her biological dad. You ever wonder how a tiny red crab ended up with a massive sperm whale for a daughter? Like, basic biology doesn't work that way. We see this impossible family dynamic right from Pearl's debut in Squeaky Boots, and honestly, the show never even tries to explain how this could happen naturally. That's because it didn't happen naturally. In Squeaky Boots, we get our first real look at Pearl and Mr. Krabs' relationship. She's this typical teenage whale who wants trendy flipper slippers, and he's this cheap crab who buys her fishing boots instead. But if you think about it, there's something really strange hiding underneath this whole father-daughter dynamic. How does a crab end up raising a whale? Like, the only logical explanation is adoption. And given what we know about the ocean, that adoption probably came from unfortunate circumstances. Here's what really happened. Pearl's real parents went missing when she was young, and Mr. Krabs found her as a baby. Maybe he was out scavenging for treasure or cheap supplies when he discovered this orphaned whale calf. Being the opportunistic businessman he is, Mr. Krabs probably saw dollar signs. A whale daughter could be great for business, right? Big, impressive, draws attention to the restaurant. But here's where it gets complicated. Mr. Krabs has been letting Pearl believe he's her biological father her entire life. She calls him daddy and genuinely thinks he's her real dad. She has no idea that her actual parents disappeared years ago. Mr. Krabs has been playing this role for so long that even he might have started believing it. Think about how different Pearl and Mr. Krabs are. She's this social, trendy teenager who cares about fitting in with her friends. He's this money-obsessed hermit who thinks $2 fishing boots are an appropriate gift for a teenage girl. There's no family resemblance, no shared interests, nothing that suggests they're actually related. Even their species difference is so extreme it's almost comical. The fishing boots and squeaky boots are actually really significant when you think about this theory. What are fishing boots used for? Commercial fishing operations. Mr. Krabs literally gave his adopted whale daughter footwear designed for the industry that might have affected her family. That's either incredibly thoughtless or incredibly telling, depending on how you look at it. Pearl's reaction to the boots makes way more sense if she's adopted. She's subconsciously disturbed by receiving something connected to fishing. Her crying is so intense it shakes the entire house. Mr. Krabs' cheapness throughout the episode also supports this theory. He spent $2 whole on those boots and acts like it's a huge expense. If Pearl was really his biological daughter, wouldn't he be more willing to spend money on her? But if she's adopted, maybe he sees her more as a responsibility than family. He's providing for her, sure, but he's doing it as cheaply as possible. The way Mr. Krabs talks about the boots is telling too. He keeps emphasizing what a bargain they were and how much money he saved. A real father might focus on whether his daughter likes the gift. Mr. Krabs is focused on the financial aspect. It's like he's calculating the cost of keeping Pearl happy and housed. Pearl's friends all have flipper slippers, which suggests there's this whole whale community in Bikini Bottom that Pearl belongs to. But she's the only one living with a non-whale parent. Where are all the other whale families? Maybe they moved away? Or maybe there's some other reason why Pearl ended up alone. Mr. Krabs might be one of the few sea creatures willing to take in an orphaned whale child. The adoption theory also explains why Pearl seems so disconnected from Mr. Krabs' business. She shows up at the Krusty Krab sometimes, but she's never really involved. If she was his biological daughter, wouldn't she be more interested in the family business? Instead, she acts like the restaurant is just where her dad works, not something she has any connection to. Mr. Krabs' overprotectiveness of Pearl throughout the series makes more sense if she's adopted too. He's being a guilty guardian who knows he's hiding the truth about her origins. Every time Pearl wants to do something independent, Mr. Krabs panics. Maybe he's afraid she'll discover the truth about what happened to her real parents. The most unsettling part of this theory is that Pearl probably has questions about her past without even knowing it. She might have weird dreams or strange feelings about certain things, but she doesn't understand why. Mr. Krabs has prevented her from learning about her real family by maintaining this lie. Think about all the times Pearl acts out or rebels against Mr. Krabs. Maybe this is her subconscious rejecting the situation she's been placed in. Deep down, she knows something doesn't add up about their relationship, but she can't figure out what. Mr. Krabs benefits from this arrangement in multiple ways. He gets to look like a generous, caring father figure who took in an orphan, he gets the business advantages of having a whale daughter, and he gets someone to potentially inherit his restaurant empire when he's gone. But Pearl gets none of the truth about who she really is or where she comes from. The saddest part is that Pearl genuinely loves Mr. Krabs and sees him as her real father. She has no idea that her entire identity is built on information that's been kept from her. She's living in this bubble where she thinks she's just a weird biological situation instead of someone with a hidden past. This theory turns squeaky boots from a silly episode about annoying footwear into something much more complex. Every time Pearl calls Mr. Krabs daddy, every time she acts like a normal teenager wanting normal things, every time Mr. Krabs acts cheap and dismissive toward her, it's all happening against this backdrop of hidden secrets. Mr. Krabs is a guardian who actively keeps his adopted daughter's true identity hidden while benefiting from her presence in his life. The fishing boots are a symbol of the disconnect between Pearl's real background and the life Mr. Krabs has created for her. The really twisted part is that Mr. Krabs probably tells himself he's doing Pearl a favor by not telling her the truth. He thinks he's protecting her from painful knowledge about her past. But really, he's protecting himself from having to explain how he ended up with custody of her and what happened to her real family. Pearl deserves to know who she really is, but Mr. Krabs has decided that his version of her story is better than the truth. The next theory we need to examine is the whale vomit theory, the disturbing idea that the secret ingredient in Krabby Patties is Pearl's vomit, which would make it incredibly valuable like real whale ambergris used in expensive perfumes. You ever wonder why Mr. Krabs guards that Krabby Patty formula like his life depends on it? Even his own fry cook doesn't know what's in it. In the episode Plankton, we see just how paranoid Mr. Krabs is about keeping this recipe secret. He won't tell SpongeBob, he won't tell anyone, and he's willing to fight Plankton to the death over it. But what if the reason he's so secretive is because the main ingredient is absolutely disgusting? In Plankton, we watch Plankton go to insane lengths to steal one Krabby Patty and analyze its ingredients. He literally invades SpongeBob's brain, controls his body, and steals a patty just to find out what's in it. But here's the thing, if the ingredients were normal burger stuff, why would it be such a big secret? Why wouldn't Mr. Krabs just tell SpongeBob what he's cooking with? The answer might be that the secret ingredient comes from Pearl, and not in a cute way. In the real world, whale vomit is called ambergris, and it's one of the most expensive substances on the planet. It's used in high-end perfumes and can sell for thousands of dollars per pound. Whales produce it in their stomachs when they can't digest certain things, and eventually they throw it up. Think about Mr. Krabs' relationship with Pearl in this context. He adopted this whale daughter, but he's also a businessman who's obsessed with money. What if he discovered that Pearl's vomit is the perfect ingredient for making irresistible burgers? Suddenly adopting a whale makes perfect business sense. He's getting a source of the most valuable cooking ingredient in the ocean. This explains why the Krusty Krab is so successful despite serving what's basically just hamburgers. Normal burgers wouldn't create the kind of addiction we see in Bikini Bottom, but burgers made with whale ambergris? That would explain why customers keep coming back no matter how much Mr. Krabs charges them. They're literally addicted to Pearl's vomit without knowing it. The secrecy makes way more sense now too. Mr. Krabs can't tell SpongeBob that he's been cooking with his adoptive daughter's throw-up. Can you imagine how SpongeBob would react? He'd quit immediately. The whole operation would fall apart if anyone found out what was really going into those patties. In Plankton, when SpongeBob describes the Krabby Patty ingredients, he talks about the 100% all-secret patty and mentions it's secretly assembled. He lists normal ingredients like cheese, pickles, lettuce, tomato, and onion, but he keeps emphasizing that everything is secret. What if the patty itself is made from Pearl's ambergris mixed with regular meat? Plankton's reaction to SpongeBob's description is telling too. He starts drooling and gets so excited that he jumps out of SpongeBob's head toward the patty, but then he bounces right off it and falls into his own analyzer. Maybe that's because the patty has this weird, bouncy texture from the whale vomit ingredient that makes it different from normal food. Mr. Krabs' extreme cheapness throughout the series also supports this theory. If he's getting his main ingredient for free from Pearl every time she gets sick, his profit margins would be insane. No wonder he can afford to pay SpongeBob almost nothing. His food costs are basically zero because his daughter is producing the most expensive ingredient herself. This theory also explains why Pearl seems so disconnected from the family business. She probably doesn't know that her dad has been collecting her vomit and using it in his restaurant. Imagine finding out that your adoptive father has been making millions off your stomach problems. That would destroy their relationship forever. The really dark part is that Mr. Krabs might be making Pearl sick on purpose to increase production. Think about all the times we see Pearl upset or crying intensely. Emotional stress can definitely make people throw up. What if Mr. Krabs has been deliberately creating situations that make Pearl nauseous so he can collect more ambergris? Remember in Squeaky Boots when Mr. Krabs gives Pearl those horrible fishing boots for her birthday? She cries so hard it shakes the whole house. That kind of intense emotional reaction could easily make someone throw up. Mr. Krabs acts like he's just being cheap, but maybe he's actually trying to trigger a vomiting episode. The whale vomit theory turns every episode where Pearl gets upset into something much more sinister. Every time she's disappointed, every time she cries, every time she gets angry, Mr. Krabs might be waiting in the background with a bucket, ready to collect his next batch of secret ingredient. Plankton's obsession with the formula makes more sense too if it contains ambergris. He's trying to get access to one of the most valuable substances in the ocean. No wonder he's willing to build mind control devices and elaborate schemes. If he could figure out how to make his own ambergris, he'd become the richest creature in Bikini Bottom overnight. The computer analysis at the end of Plankton is interesting too. When Plankton falls into his own analyzer, it reads him as 1% evil, 99% hot gas, but it never gets to analyze the actual Krabby Patty. Maybe that's because if it had analyzed the patty, it would have revealed the whale vomit ingredient and given away the whole secret. SpongeBob's loyalty to the Krabby Patty throughout the episode takes on a darker meaning if this theory is true. He's literally defending Pearl's vomit from being stolen, but he has no idea that's what he's protecting. He thinks he's saving a delicious burger when he's actually saving a container of processed whale throw-up. The most disturbing part of this theory is that it means every customer at the Krusty Krab is unknowingly eating Pearl's vomit and loving it. They're all addicted to whale ambergris without having any clue what they're consuming. Mr. Krabs has basically turned the entire population of Bikini Bottom into unknowing participants in his gross business model. This theory also explains why the chum bucket fails so miserably. Plankton is trying to compete with ambergris using regular ingredients. No matter how good his cooking gets, he can't match the addictive properties of whale vomit. That's why customers always choose the Krusty Krab over the chum bucket, even when the service is terrible. If this theory is true, then Mr. Krabs is someone who's been exploiting his adoptive daughter's bodily functions for profit while keeping everyone in the dark about what they're really eating. Let's dive into Patrick's hidden intelligence theory, the idea that Patrick is actually incredibly smart, but pretends to be dumb to avoid responsibility, work, and the stress that comes with being expected to do things. You ever notice how Patrick can be completely clueless 1 minute and then drop some surprisingly deep wisdom the next? Most people just write it off as inconsistent writing, but what if there's something way more calculated going on? What if Patrick has been playing the long game this entire time? Pretending to be stupid so he can live his best life without anyone expecting anything from him. In Big Pink Loser, we get to see this theory in action. The whole episode revolves around Patrick being jealous of SpongeBob's awards and trying to figure out how to get his own. But here's the thing throughout the episode. Patrick shows moments of surprising insight that completely contradict his supposed stupidity. When SpongeBob is trying to teach him basic tasks at the Krusty Krab, Patrick struggles with everything. He can't deliver food without eating it, he gets angry at people calling the restaurant by its actual name, and he can't even sweep properly. But then something interesting happens. When Patrick finally manages to open a jar after SpongeBob walks him through it step by step, he actually remembers and analyzes exactly what he did. He tells SpongeBob, "Remember when I had my hand up, and I put it on the lid, and then I took the lid off and I thought I broke it? But I didn't. I opened the jar with my hand." That's someone who's capable of breaking down complex tasks and understanding cause and effect. The real smoking gun comes at the end of the episode. Patrick gets an award for doing absolutely nothing longer than anyone else. When SpongeBob asks what he's gonna do now, Patrick says, "I'm gonna go protect my title," and immediately goes back under his rock to sleep. Think about that for a second. Patrick instantly understood that to keep his award, he needed to continue doing nothing. He immediately grasped the concept and took action to protect his achievement. That's strategic thinking. The genius of Patrick's plan becomes clear when you look at what he accomplished. He spent 1 day pretending to try at work, failed spectacularly at everything, and then got rewarded for his natural lifestyle. He basically tricked the system into giving him an award for being exactly who he already was. Meanwhile, SpongeBob works his butt off every day and gets awards that he doesn't even seem to care about that much. Patrick's stupidity throughout the episode looks completely different when you realize it might be intentional. When he eats the food instead of delivering it, he's choosing the more enjoyable option. When he gets mad at people calling him Krusty Krab, he's annoyed that people are bothering him with phone calls when he'd rather be doing nothing. The copying behavior later in the episode supports this theory too. Patrick imitates SpongeBob strategically. He copies SpongeBob's outfit, his mannerisms, even his house design. But when SpongeBob tries to outsmart him with the fake hand on the grill trick, Patrick falls for it. Or does he? Maybe Patrick knew it was a trick but played along because getting a minor burn was worth maintaining his cover. When SpongeBob dresses up like Patrick to try to snap him out of it, Patrick delivers one of the most revealing lines in the episode. What's so great about being a big pink loser? On the surface, it sounds like self-deprecation. But think about what Patrick is really saying. He's asking what's wrong with his lifestyle. He's questioning why SpongeBob thinks being lazy and carefree is something to be ashamed of. The fact that Patrick wins an award for doing nothing is validation of his entire life philosophy. While everyone else is running around trying to achieve things and win recognition, Patrick has figured out that he can be happier and more successful by simply opting out of the rat race entirely. Throughout the series, we see Patrick consistently avoid work and responsibility, but in Big Pink Loser, we see him fail at tasks that should be easy even for someone genuinely stupid. Can't figure out how to deliver food without eating it? That's choosing immediate gratification over following instructions. Can't sweep with the right end of a broom? Maybe he knows exactly which end to use, but finds it more amusing to do it wrong. The phone answering scene is particularly telling. Patrick gets genuinely angry when people ask if they've reached the Krusty Krab. His response, "No, this is Patrick," sounds like confusion, but it could just as easily be irritation. He knows they're calling the restaurant, but he doesn't want to deal with taking orders or helping customers. By acting confused, he can avoid actually doing any work. When that customer asks Patrick if he just blew in from Stupid Town, Patrick's reaction is interesting. He doesn't seem confused by the insult, he seems hurt. Someone who was genuinely stupid might not even understand they were being insulted, but Patrick understands exactly what the guy meant, which suggests he's not as dumb as he pretends to be. The most damning evidence comes from Patrick's award speech. When he realizes the trophy is for doing nothing, he immediately understands what he needs to do to keep it. "I'm gonna go protect my title," shows that Patrick completely grasps the concept of maintaining his achievement. Someone truly stupid wouldn't understand that he needs to keep doing nothing to keep his award. Patrick's entire lifestyle makes more sense when you view it through this lens. He's lazy because he's smart enough to realize that most work is pointless. He's irresponsible because he's figured out that avoiding responsibility leads to a more enjoyable life. The really twisted part of this theory is that Patrick might be the smartest character in the show. While SpongeBob exhausts himself trying to please everyone, while Squidward makes himself miserable pursuing art that nobody appreciates. While Mr. Krabs drives himself crazy chasing money, Patrick has achieved something they all want: contentment. He's happy, stress-free, and now he even has an award to show for it. Patrick's hidden intelligence theory suggests that the dumbest character in SpongeBob is actually playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. He's figured out how to game the system, avoid expectations, and live exactly the life he wants while convincing everyone around him that he's too stupid to know any better. And hey, just a reminder to subscribe to our channel. Here's another wild theory. The Marxist theory suggests that SpongeBob is actually a perfect representation of Marxist philosophy, with Mr. Krabs as the greedy capitalist owner, Squidward as the class-conscious worker trying to organize, and SpongeBob as the exploited proletariat who doesn't even realize he's being screwed over. You think SpongeBob is just a silly cartoon about a talking sponge, but what if it's actually one of the most accurate depictions of capitalist exploitation ever put on television? The whole show is basically a masterclass in how the wealthy owner class exploits workers while keeping them happy enough that they don't revolt. And nowhere is this more obvious than in Squid on Strike. In this episode, the entire dynamic play out perfectly. Mr. Krabs starts charging his employees for basic human functions like breathing, talking, standing, and even existing. This is exactly how real capitalism works. Companies find every possible way to extract more value from workers while paying them less. Mr. Krabs literally bills Squidward for breathing, which is the most basic requirement for staying alive. Squidward represents the class-conscious worker who actually understands what's happening. He sees through Mr. Krabs' exploitation and tries to organize a strike. He tells SpongeBob they need to unite as workers and demand the respect we deserve from the boss. That's straight-up Marxist language. Squidward understands that workers have power when they organize collectively, and he's trying to build class consciousness in SpongeBob. But here's where it gets really twisted. SpongeBob represents the perfect exploited worker, who's been so brainwashed by the system that he actually loves his oppression. When Mr. Krabs hands him a bill instead of a paycheck, SpongeBob immediately starts paying him. He doesn't question it, he doesn't get angry, he just accepts that he owes his boss money for the privilege of working. That's exactly how capitalism keeps workers in line, by making them grateful for the opportunity to be exploited. SpongeBob even says, "I can't accept your money, Mr. Krabs. Grilling is my passion." This is the ultimate capitalist brainwashing, convincing workers that they should be grateful to work for free because they're doing what they love. How many times have you heard, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life? That's just code for, we can pay you less because you should be happy to be here. The strike itself shows exactly how hard it is to build working-class solidarity. Squidward tries to teach SpongeBob basic strike tactics, but SpongeBob keeps messing it up. When he's supposed to throw his hat on the ground as a symbol of rejecting his oppression, he can't do it because "this hat is my friend." He's so attached to the symbols of his exploitation that he can't let them go. When SpongeBob makes his picket sign, he writes Krusty Krab Funfair instead of Krusty Krab Unfair. This actually ends up bringing more customers to the restaurant, which completely defeats the purpose of the strike. It's a perfect metaphor for how well-meaning workers can accidentally help their bosses even when they're trying to fight back. The most revealing part is how the other workers react to Squidward's speech. He gives this passionate talk about dismantling oppression and fighting big business, and the crowd gets all excited. But then someone says they're hungry and everyone immediately runs into the Krusty Krab to buy burgers. They'll cheer for worker solidarity, but the moment they want something, they're right back to supporting the system that exploits them. Mr. Krabs' reaction to the strike is perfect too. He's thrilled because the strike is actually bringing him more business. He thanks Squidward for attracting paying customers with all the signs and speeches. This is exactly how real capitalists handle worker protests. They find ways to profit from them. The ending is the most brutal part of the whole episode. Mr. Krabs comes back begging for his employees to return because the teenage replacements are ruining everything. But when SpongeBob destroys the restaurant while trying to dismantle the establishment, Mr. Krabs turns it into an even worse form of exploitation. He tells them they have to work for him forever to pay off the damages. SpongeBob is thrilled by this. He shouts, "The strike worked, Squidward. We got our jobs back forever." He's so brainwashed that he thinks being sentenced to eternal unpaid labor is a victory. Meanwhile, Squidward realizes the horror of what just happened. The episode ends with them working as literal skeletons, still stuck in the same jobs after an eternity. That final image is pure Marxist theory workers trapped in an endless cycle of exploitation, working until they literally die, with no hope of escape. And the saddest part is that one of them thinks it's great while the other sees it for what it really is. The whole episode shows how the capitalist system divides workers against themselves. Squidward understands the exploitation and tries to fight it, but SpongeBob is so indoctrinated that he actively works against his own interests. This is exactly what Marx wrote about, how capitalism creates false consciousness that prevents workers from recognizing their shared struggle. Mr. Krabs doesn't need to use force to control his workers because he's convinced them that exploitation is normal and even desirable. SpongeBob literally pays his boss for the privilege of working unpaid overtime. He's the perfect worker from a capitalist perspective, productive, grateful, and completely unaware of how badly he's being screwed. The show even includes a replacement worker, the teenage fry cook who crosses the picket line to take SpongeBob's job. This is classic union-busting strategy, bringing in scabs to break strikes and divide workers. The fact that this kid idolizes SpongeBob but still takes his job shows how the system pits workers against each other. Throughout the series, we see this dynamic play out over and over. SpongeBob works incredibly hard, creates massive value for Mr. Krabs, and gets paid almost nothing. He's always eager to work extra hours, skip breaks, and do whatever Mr. Krabs asks. Meanwhile, Mr. Krabs gets richer and richer while contributing almost nothing to the actual work. Squidward represents the worker who's figured out that he's being exploited but feels powerless to change it. He's miserable at his job, resents his boss, and occasionally tries to organize resistance, but he's always defeated by the system and by SpongeBob's willingness to undermine any collective action. The Marxist theory turns SpongeBob from an innocent kids show into a dark commentary on how capitalism destroys workers' lives and consciousness. Every episode where SpongeBob cheerfully accepts terrible working conditions becomes an example of how the system brainwashes people into loving their own oppression. The really twisted part is that this is all presented as comedy. We're supposed to laugh at SpongeBob's enthusiasm for being exploited and Squidward's failed attempts at resistance. The show normalizes terrible working conditions and makes heroes out of people who accept them without question. Another theory we need to explore is the SpongeBob as a prodigy theory. The idea that SpongeBob is actually an underachieving genius who can master any skill instantly, but chooses to waste his incredible talents on menial jobs and simple pleasures. You ever wonder how SpongeBob can be so naive and childlike, but also pull off impossible feats when he actually tries? Most people just chalk it up to cartoon logic, but what if there's something way more twisted going on? What if SpongeBob is one of the most gifted individuals in Bikini Bottom, but he's deliberately underachieving because he's too pure to realize how special he is? In Artist Unknown, we see this theory play out perfectly. Squidward thinks he's going to teach this clueless sponge the basics of art, but SpongeBob immediately destroys every expectation. When Squidward draws a crooked circle and asks SpongeBob to copy it, SpongeBob draws a perfect circle. Not just good, perfect. When Squidward demands to see his process, SpongeBob casually draws a realistic human head, then erases details until it becomes a perfect circle. Think about what just happened there. SpongeBob demonstrated that he understands advanced artistic techniques, human anatomy, proportions, and technical skill that would take most people years to develop. But he presents it like it's the most natural thing in the world. He doesn't even realize he did something incredible. Then when Squidward crumples up his paper, SpongeBob turns it into an origami sculpture of him and Squidward playing leapfrog. Origami is a complex art form that requires spatial reasoning, patience, and fine motor skills. SpongeBob does it instantly from scraps of paper like it's nothing. When Squidward rips that up too, SpongeBob makes another artwork from the smaller pieces. He's so naturally gifted that he can turn literal garbage into art without even thinking about it. But the real proof comes with the sculpture scene. Squidward tries to show off by chiseling marble and creates a pile of rubble. SpongeBob takes one swing with the mallet and produces a perfect replica of Michelangelo's David. We're talking about one of the most famous sculptures in human history, created by one of the greatest artists who ever lived. SpongeBob recreates it effortlessly on his first try. Sculpt something like David, you need to understand anatomy, proportion, technique, and have incredible hand-eye coordination. You need to visualize the finished piece inside the raw marble and know exactly how much force to apply where. SpongeBob does all of this intuitively. What makes this even more twisted is how SpongeBob reacts when Squidward tells him his masterpiece isn't real art. SpongeBob immediately believes him and thinks he's terrible at art. He throws himself out the window into a dumpster because he's convinced he has no talent. A genuine artistic prodigy is so humble and trusting that he lets a mediocre artist convince him he's worthless. The really messed up part is what happens when Squidward tries to get SpongeBob to recreate his masterpiece. SpongeBob has completely internalized Squidward's lessons about following rules and going by the book. When he tries to draw a circle again, he draws it crooked like Squidward's. When he tries to make origami, he just puts the paper back together normally. His natural genius has been suppressed by bad teaching. When SpongeBob finally tries to sculpt again, he spends all this time doing ridiculous rituals sniffing the marble, licking it, washing it, dating it, trying to become one with it. These aren't artistic techniques. They're the desperate actions of someone who's been told his natural ability is wrong. He's trying so hard to follow Squidward's rules that he's blocked his own instincts. The result? His sculpture crumbles into rubble, just like Squidward's did. But here's the kicker: SpongeBob puts Squidward's nose on the rubble and says, now it's art. He's learned to value rule following over actual artistic merit. The prodigy has been trained to think like a hack. This episode reveals something really dark about SpongeBob's character. He's surrounded by people who are less talented than him, but because he's so trusting and humble, he lets them define his worth. Squidward is a mediocre artist who's jealous of SpongeBob's natural ability, so he convinces SpongeBob that technique and rules matter more than talent and vision. The art collector's reaction proves SpongeBob's genius. This guy is a world-famous expert who immediately recognizes SpongeBob's sculpture as the work of a true genius. He knows quality when he sees it, but SpongeBob will never know this because Squidward takes credit for the work. Throughout the series, we see other examples of SpongeBob's hidden genius. He can drive perfectly when he's not thinking about it. He's an incredible cook who can make gourmet meals from basic ingredients. He shows advanced knowledge of jellyfish behavior, boat mechanics, and even scientific concepts when the plot requires it. But he's always portrayed as simple and childlike. The disturbing truth is that SpongeBob might be the most gifted character in the show, but he's trapped in a menial job and surrounded by people who don't recognize or appreciate his abilities. He could probably be a world-renowned artist, scientist, or anything else he wanted to be. Instead, he's flipping burgers for a boss who pays him almost nothing. What makes this even sadder is that SpongeBob seems genuinely happy with his life. He's so pure and optimistic that he finds joy in simple things, even when he's being massively underutilized. The art episode shows us the tragic cycle. SpongeBob demonstrates incredible ability. Someone with less talent tells him he's wrong, and SpongeBob believes them because he trusts authority figures. His genius gets suppressed, and he goes back to being content with mediocrity. This theory makes every episode where SpongeBob struggles with simple tasks way more depressing. He's been conditioned to doubt himself so much that he overthinks everything. His natural genius has been buried under layers of bad advice and false lessons. The most twisted part is that the people around SpongeBob benefit from keeping him down. Mr. Krabs gets an incredibly talented employee for almost no pay. Squidward gets to feel superior to someone who's actually more gifted than him. Mrs. Puff gets job security because SpongeBob will never pass his driving test and stop needing lessons. SpongeBob's prodigy status explains why he can master any skill when he's not trying, but fails when he's following someone else's instructions. His natural instincts are genius level, but his conscious mind has been programmed to follow rules that actually make him worse. The saddest part is that SpongeBob will probably never realize his true potential. He's too trusting to question the people who tell him he's simple, and too humble to recognize his own incredible abilities. He's a genius trapped in a world that needs him to stay ordinary, and he's too pure to see the prison they've built around his mind. Let's dive into this next disturbing theory. What if SpongeBob himself represents ocean pollution, specifically a synthetic kitchen sponge contaminating the natural underwater ecosystem? Think about it for a second. We have a literal kitchen sponge living in the ocean, and in Nature Pants, this becomes crystal clear when SpongeBob tries to abandon his artificial life to live naturally with the jellyfish. Here's what makes this theory so unsettling. SpongeBob is explicitly described as a sea sponge, but everything about his design screams artificial kitchen sponge. He's bright yellow with perfect square holes. He absorbs water like crazy. And he even works in a kitchen flipping burgers. Real sea sponges don't look anything like SpongeBob. They're usually brown, irregular, and definitely don't have his synthetic appearance. The show constantly reminds us that SpongeBob doesn't belong in the natural ocean environment. Nature Pants drives this point home brutally. The entire episode is about SpongeBob realizing he's living an industrial life and wanting to return to nature with the jellyfish. But here's the kicker: when he tries to integrate with the natural ecosystem, everything goes wrong. The jellyfish sting him and chase him away. The sea urchins make him itch uncontrollably. Even the kelp tastes disgusting to him. The ocean's natural inhabitants literally reject him because he's a foreign pollutant. When SpongeBob first arrives at Jellyfish Fields, he says, "I'm home," over and over again, but the jellyfish immediately knock him down as they fly by. They want nothing to do with him. When he tries to introduce himself as Jelly Bob, a jellyfish stings his hand, making it swell up. This is the ocean's immune system reacting to a contaminant. The jellyfish can sense that SpongeBob is artificial, synthetic, and doesn't belong in their ecosystem. The symbolism gets even darker when you realize what SpongeBob represents in terms of human impact on the ocean. Kitchen sponges are one of the most common forms of microplastic pollution in marine environments. They break down into tiny synthetic particles that marine life accidentally consumes, thinking it's food. Sound familiar? SpongeBob works at a restaurant making food that fish eat. He's literally representing synthetic pollution being consumed by marine life. The show even highlights SpongeBob's artificial nature through his behavior patterns. Notice how he never acts like a real sea creature. He walks instead of floating, he needs to breathe air bubbles, and he constantly uses human tools and technology. Real sea sponges are filter feeders that stay attached to rocks. They don't run around making burgers. SpongeBob's hyperactive, unnatural behavior represents how synthetic materials disrupt normal ocean ecosystems. Look at how the episode ends. SpongeBob can't survive in the natural environment and has to return to his artificial life at the Krusty Krab. But here's the disturbing part: he spreads the poison sea urchin bacteria to all his friends when they hug him. This is exactly how pollution works. The synthetic contaminant picks up toxins from the environment and then spreads them to other marine life through contact. SpongeBob literally makes everyone else sick just by being near them. The episode even shows SpongeBob taking off his pants and running around naked, which strips away his human-like qualities and reveals him as just a synthetic sponge object. When he's naked in Jellyfish Fields, the animators are careful to show him partially covered by rocks and bushes, almost like they're trying to hide the fact that he's an inanimate object pretending to be alive. Think about Mr. Krabs' speech in his office. He tells SpongeBob that the kitchen is his natural habitat and the grill is his wide-open range. This is the show telling us that SpongeBob belongs in human industrial spaces, not in the natural ocean. The golden spatula he calls a scepter represents human tools and technology that don't belong in marine ecosystems. Mr. Krabs even admits SpongeBob wouldn't last one day in the wild, because synthetic materials break down quickly when exposed to natural ocean conditions. Even SpongeBob's friends represent different aspects of environmental destruction. Patrick is literally a rock representing habitat destruction and coral reef damage. Squidward is constantly grumpy and pessimistic, representing the stressed and dying marine life. Sandy is a land mammal living underwater in an artificial bubble, representing invasive species and unnatural habitat modification. The most chilling detail? When SpongeBob gives away all his possessions before leaving for the wild, he's essentially admitting that all his belongings are artificial human objects that don't belong in the ocean. The phone books, the can opener, even his precious jellyfish net, all reliable. These are all human-made items polluting the underwater world. Patrick's emotional breakdown over receiving these items shows how marine life becomes attached to human garbage, staking it for valuable resources. Patrick's reaction is the most telling. He becomes completely unhinged when SpongeBob tries to go natural, even attempting to capture him in a jar. This represents how marine ecosystems become disrupted when pollution tries to integrate naturally. Patrick wants to preserve SpongeBob as a trophy, in a jar exactly how humans preserve natural specimens after contaminating their environments. The jar even has SpongeBob's name written on it, like a scientific specimen. The jellyfish hive scene is particularly disturbing. When SpongeBob climbs into their natural home, they immediately attack and sting him repeatedly. This is nature's way of rejecting foreign contaminants. The jellyfish recognize that SpongeBob doesn't belong in their ecosystem and actively try to remove him. Notice how SpongeBob tries to eat their jelly, but when they return, they become aggressive, representing how pollution disrupts natural food sources. The cave scene adds another layer of horror. SpongeBob tries to use natural materials like grass for bedding and rocks for pillows, but he's completely incompatible with them. The poison sea urchins crawling all over him represent how synthetic materials attract and concentrate toxins from the environment. His desperate scratching and itching shows the physical breakdown that happens when artificial materials are exposed to natural ocean processes. When SpongeBob finally returns home, everyone welcomes him back to his artificial life. They give him a Krabby Patty and his work hat, essentially celebrating his return to being a pollutant in the food chain. The episode ends with SpongeBob saying it's great to be home while everyone else suffers from the poison he spread. This is the show's dark commentary on how pollution always returns to contaminate marine environments, no matter how much nature tries to reject it. The timing of his return is also significant. SpongeBob comes back at night, skulking through Bikini Bottom and looking at the Krusty Krab with longing. This represents how pollution persists in marine environments even when we think it's gone. He walks past Sandy's tree dome and says her name sadly, showing how pollution affects even protected natural spaces. What makes this theory so disturbing is how perfectly it aligns with real environmental issues. SpongeBob literally represents everything wrong with human impact on ocean synthetic materials, industrial food production, and the spread of toxins through marine food chains. The creators may have accidentally created the perfect metaphor for ocean pollution disguised as a kid's cartoon. The fact that children around the world love this character while he represents environmental destruction makes the theory even more unsettling. Here's where things get seriously disturbing. We're watching a crab who owns a burger restaurant in an ocean full of sea creatures, and somehow nobody questions what's actually in those patties. The show has always danced around this obvious issue, but friend or foe gives us the smoking gun we've been looking for. When Karen reveals the true story of how the Krabby Patty was created, she shows us that it was a complete accident. Ingredients fell into the original patty batter when Plankton stormed out and knocked over a shelf. Think about what this really means. Mr. Krabs and Plankton were making regular meat patties that were so terrible, they literally knocked out Old Man Jenkins. The newspaper headline reads, "Plab Patties KO Old Man Jenkins," because their original recipe was basically poisoning customers. But when those mystery ingredients accidentally fell into the mix, suddenly Mr. Krabs discovers he's done it and found the perfect patty batter. What ingredients could have possibly fallen from that shelf that would transform a toxic meat patty into something so delicious that it launches Mr. Krabs' entire empire? The answer is obviously some kind of plant-based substitute that eliminated the need for actual crab meat. The show never tells us what those ingredients were, but the timing is everything. This accident happens right after Plankton and Mr. Krabs have their falling out over who's going to rule the customers. The creator Steven Hillenburg actually confirmed in interviews that there are no animal products in Krabby Patties, which should make every SpongeBob fan stop and think. We're watching a show where a crab sells burgers to fish, and the creator specifically went out of his way to confirm the patties are meat-free. Why would he need to clarify this unless the show was deliberately hiding something about the formula? Friend or Foe shows us exactly why Mr. Krabs would need a vegan substitute. Look at the customers in that episode. They're all fish and sea creatures who would presumably be eating other sea creatures if the patties contained real meat. But the show presents this as completely normal and nobody ever questions it. The only way this makes sense is if the Krabby Patty formula is actually a plant-based alternative that tastes like meat but doesn't require killing any sea life. The episode also reveals that Mr. Krabs puts seaweed sauce in the burgers, which Plankton specifically mentions during their fight. When Mr. Krabs accuses Plankton of putting too much seaweed sauce in the burger, he's basically admitting that seaweed is a crucial component of their recipe. Seaweed is one of the most obvious plant-based ingredients available in the ocean, and it makes perfect sense as the base for a vegan crab substitute. But here's where the theory gets really dark. Mr. Krabs doesn't create this vegan formula out of moral concern for sea creatures. He stumbles into it by accident and then realizes he can make massive profits by selling fake meat to customers who think they're eating the real thing. The whole Krusty Krab empire is built on food fraud. Mr. Krabs is essentially running an underwater version of those fake meat scandals that happen in the real world. The episode shows us that after the accident, kids at the school start saying the Krabby Patties have flavor and are edible and they can actually hold it down. These aren't the reactions you'd expect to amazing meat. These are the reactions of people who've been eating garbage and finally taste something that resembles real food. The vegan formula tastes better than anything these kids have ever eaten. Meanwhile, Plankton gets stuck with the bottom half of the original recipe that just says, "and a pinch of chum." Chum is literally ground up fish parts used for bait, which explains why Plankton's burgers are absolutely disgusting throughout the entire series. He's been making actual meat burgers this whole time while Mr. Krabs discovered the secret to plant-based alternatives. The most disturbing part is how the show handles Mr. Krabs' relationship with money. In Friend or Foe, we see his first exposure to currency when he finds that penny, and he immediately spends it on a balloon for Plankton. But after he discovers the Krabby Patty formula, money becomes his obsession. The formula corrupts him completely because he realizes he can make unlimited profits by selling fake meat. Think about every other episode where Mr. Krabs is obsessed with money. He's protecting a massive fraud that could destroy his entire business if anyone found out the truth. The secret formula is valuable because it's the only thing preventing Mr. Krabs from being exposed as someone who's been lying to customers for decades about what they're actually eating. The episode also shows us that Karen recorded everything, which means there's literal video evidence of how the vegan formula was created. But instead of exposing the truth, she uses this information to help Plankton try to steal the formula. Even Karen, who's supposed to be a computer programmed for logic, gets caught up in the deception instead of revealing that the whole conflict is based on food fraud. When you watch other episodes with this theory in mind, everything starts making sense. Mr. Krabs' extreme secrecy about the formula, his paranoia about Plankton stealing it, his obsession with money, it's all because he's running a massive con game. The Krusty Krab is the center of an underwater economy based on selling fake meat to sea creatures who don't know they're being deceived. The show even hints at this in other episodes when characters mention how different Krabby Patties taste compared to other food. They're not just better burgers, they're a completely different type of food that nobody else in Bikini Bottom knows how to make. That's because Mr. Krabs accidentally discovered plant-based meat substitutes decades before anyone else figured out the technology. What makes this theory so disturbing is that it turns Mr. Krabs from a greedy but lovable character into someone who's built his entire fortune on lying to his customers and his community. Every time we see him counting money or obsessing over profits, we're actually watching someone who knows his whole empire could collapse if the truth about his vegan formula ever came out. Before I tell you about the next theory, make sure you've subscribed to our channel. Let's explore this next unsettling theory. What if the main characters in SpongeBob represent different stages of life, with SpongeBob embodying childhood innocence, Squidward representing adult cynicism, and Patrick symbolizing someone who refuses to mature? This theory becomes crystal clear in Band Geeks when we see how each character handles responsibility and dreams. Think about how perfectly this plays out in the episode. Squidward gets a phone call from his old rival Squilliam, who brags about leading a fancy band that's supposed to play the Bubble Bowl. This is pure adult territory, competitive career achievements, trying to impress former classmates, and desperately wanting to prove you've made something of yourself. When Squilliam offers Squidward the chance to replace his band, he's basically asking if Squidward has grown up and accomplished anything meaningful with his life. The crushing moment comes when Squidward lies and claims he has a band, purely to save face in front of someone from his past. This is such a painfully adult behavior, lying about your accomplishments, because you're ashamed of where you ended up. Squidward represents everyone who had dreams as a kid, but got stuck in a dead-end job, watching their former classmates succeed while they flip burgers or work retail. But here's where the age metaphor gets really obvious. When SpongeBob joins the band, he approaches it with pure childhood enthusiasm. He asks, "Is this the part where we start kicking?" Because he's thinking of kick lines and chorus dancing. He has no concept of the serious, professional, musical performance that Squidward desperately needs. SpongeBob sees the whole thing as a fun game, while Squidward sees it as his last chance to prove he's not a failure. Patrick's behavior throughout the episode perfectly captures someone who refuses to grow up. He asks if mayonnaise is an instrument, kicks Sandy for no reason, and generally acts like a toddler who's never learned basic social skills. When Sandy beats him up and stuffs him in a trombone, he just accepts it and keeps going. Patrick represents people who never developed emotional maturity and just stumble through life causing problems for everyone around them. The practice sessions show exactly how each life stage handles challenges. SpongeBob remains optimistic and eager despite everything going wrong. He's still in that childhood phase where you believe everything will work out if you just try hard enough. Squidward becomes increasingly frustrated and bitter as reality crushes his dreams, just like adults do when they realize how difficult life actually is. The most telling moment comes when Squidward finally breaks down and tells everyone they've crushed his one chance at happiness. This is pure adult despair, the realization that opportunities are limited and time is running out. Kids don't think this way because they believe they have unlimited chances to achieve their dreams. But adults know that some doors close forever, and Squidward thinks he's watching his last door slam shut. Patrick's response to Squidward's emotional breakdown is just, "You're welcome," which shows he completely missed the emotional weight of the situation. This is classic immature behavior, being unable to read social cues or understand when something is serious. Patrick lives in a world where nothing has real consequences because he's never emotionally developed past childhood. But then SpongeBob does something that reveals the power of maintaining childlike qualities as an adult. He gives that speech about pretending Squidward was a fireman or ambulance driver and somehow manages to inspire everyone to actually try. This represents the rare adult who keeps their childhood optimism and ability to motivate others through pure enthusiasm. The performance scene is where the metaphor becomes most obvious. When they rise up into the football stadium filled with real humans, Patrick says, "These are some ugly-looking fish," and SpongeBob suggests they might be in a toxic waste dump. They're literally entering the adult world, the surface where humans live, and they don't understand it at all. This is exactly how kids view adult concerns and responsibilities. Squidward's terror during the performance represents adult anxiety about being judged and failing publicly. He's genuinely afraid that this disaster will humiliate him in front of his rival and confirm that he's a loser. Meanwhile, SpongeBob just starts singing with complete confidence because children don't have that same fear of judgment. The miracle of sweet victory happening represents something really profound about the relationship between different life stages. SpongeBob's childlike enthusiasm and refusal to give up actually saves Squidward's adult dreams. The episode suggests that maintaining some childhood qualities, optimism, creativity, willingness to look silly, might be essential for adult success. Squilliam fainting and being carried away on a stretcher is symbolic of what happens to adults who base their entire identity on competing with others and proving their worth through achievements. His shock at seeing Squidward succeed represents how toxic adult competition can literally make you sick when it doesn't go your way. The most disturbing aspect of this theory is how it reveals that Squidward's misery comes from completely losing touch with his inner child. He's so focused on adult concerns like money, status, and proving his worth that he's forgotten how to enjoy simple things. SpongeBob annoys him precisely because SpongeBob represents everything Squidward gave up when he grew up. Patrick's character becomes truly sad when viewed through this lens because he shows what happens when someone never develops emotional maturity. He's stunted and unable to function in adult society. His behavior causes real problems for others because he lacks the empathy and responsibility that should come with age. The episode ultimately suggests that the healthiest approach to life is SpongeBob's combination of childlike wonder with genuine care for others. He maintains his optimism and creativity while also being willing to work hard and support his friends. This represents the ideal of growing up without losing the best parts of childhood. When you view the entire series through this metaphor, every episode becomes a lesson about different approaches to aging and responsibility. Squidward's constant suffering represents the depression that comes from cynicism and giving up on dreams. Patrick's chaos represents the problems caused by refusing to mature. And SpongeBob's happiness represents the possibility of staying young at heart while still being a good person. This theory makes the show much darker because it suggests that most adults end up like Squidward, bitter, frustrated, and convinced that life is meaningless. The rare people who stay optimistic like SpongeBob are often seen as annoying or naive by those who've lost their spark. But Band Geeks proves that sometimes the childlike approach is exactly what's needed to achieve the impossible. Now let's dive into this really messed up theory. What if SpongeBob is stuck in some kind of time loop where he keeps reliving the same stuff over and over, which is why he never ages or actually learns anything? This gets super obvious in Employee of the Month, when you realize how weird it is that SpongeBob has won the same dumb award 26 times but still freaks out like it's his first time. Seriously, think about this for a second. SpongeBob tells Squidward he's won Employee of the Month 26 times in a row. That's over 2 years of working at the same job, doing the same thing, getting the same reward. But he still acts like winning this meaningless piece of paper is the most important thing that's ever happened to him. Normal people would get bored of winning the same thing over and over, right? The whole episode shows SpongeBob panicking when Mr. Krabs suggests Squidward might win this time. But wait, if SpongeBob has already proven he can win 26 times, why is he so scared? It's like his brain resets every month and he has to go through the same anxiety all over again. That's not normal behavior from someone who's supposedly experienced at something. Look at that wall of Employee of the Month pictures. It's literally the same photo of SpongeBob repeated dozens of times with slightly different months written on them. That's evidence of someone being trapped in the exact same moment over and over. It's actually pretty creepy when you think about it. And what's up with SpongeBob's calendar? He's got Annoy Squidward Day marked on there like it's a regular holiday that happens every month. This shows that SpongeBob's life follows these weird, predictable patterns that keep repeating. He's just doing the same stuff on a schedule. The really disturbing part is when SpongeBob imagines that drill sergeant version of himself giving him a pep talk. Why would someone who's won 26 times need to psychologically manipulate himself just to stay motivated? It's like his brain has created these defense mechanisms to deal with being stuck in this endless cycle. Then there's all the crazy stuff SpongeBob does in the episode. He breaks into Squidward's house, destroys alarm clocks, digs holes, sets traps, basically acts like a complete maniac. But here's the thing, none of this makes sense if he's actually confident about winning. This is the behavior of someone who's desperate and confused, like he's going through motions he doesn't fully understand. The sabotage sequence between SpongeBob and Squidward feels like something they've done before. They both know exactly how to trap each other, where to dig holes, what kind of contraptions to build. It's like they're following a script they've performed countless times, each playing their assigned role in this twisted monthly ritual. The episode ends with SpongeBob and Squidward destroying the entire restaurant with their competition. But notice how we never find out who actually wins the award? That's because in a time loop, there can't be a real ending. Everything just resets back to the beginning, ready to start the cycle all over again. When you look at the whole SpongeBob series with this theory in mind, everything makes sense. SpongeBob never ages, never gets promoted, never moves away from his parents' neighborhood. He's been working at the Krusty Krab for years, but he's still in the same entry-level position doing the same basic tasks. His relationships never change either. Squidward always hates him the exact same amount. Patrick is always equally stupid. Mr. Krabs is always equally greedy. Real relationships develop and change over time, but these characters are locked into the same personality patterns forever. Mr. Krabs becomes really sinister when you think about this theory. He's basically using SpongeBob's enthusiasm to get infinite free labor while keeping him trapped with this meaningless award. SpongeBob works his butt off for a piece of paper and some wall space, never realizing he's being exploited in this endless loop. The calendar in the episode has all these weird date errors where the weeks don't have the right number of days. This could be evidence that time itself is broken around SpongeBob. The universe is glitching because he's stuck in this temporal prison. SpongeBob's house is another clue. He lives in the same pineapple, has the same pet, does the same hobbies. Nothing about his living situation ever changes or improves, even though he's supposedly been earning money for years. He's frozen in this eternal childhood state. Gary the Snail becomes really sad in this context. He's trapped in the time loop too, forced to watch SpongeBob repeat the same mistakes forever. Gary might actually understand what's happening, but he can't talk, so he's just stuck there, watching his owner live in this prison. The scariest part is that SpongeBob might know something's wrong on some deep level. His crazy enthusiasm and constant happiness could be his brain's way of protecting him from realizing the truth. He has to stay super positive all the time, because if he ever really thought about his situation, he'd probably lose his mind. Every episode of SpongeBob basically follows the same pattern. Something happens, SpongeBob gets excited or worried, chaos ensues, then everything goes back to normal by the end. Nothing ever has lasting consequences or changes the status quo. That's exactly what you'd expect from a time loop scenario. The Employee of the Month episode is just one cycle of this endless prison. SpongeBob gets excited about the same thing he's been excited about 26 times before, goes through the same emotional journey, and ends up right back where he started. The explosion at the end might be the universe's way of hitting the reset button whenever things get too chaotic. What makes this even more disturbing is thinking about all the other characters who might be aware of the loop. Squidward's constant misery could come from knowing he's trapped but being unable to escape. His cynicism and hatred of his job make perfect sense if he's been forced to repeat the same day at the Krusty Krab hundreds of times. This theory makes SpongeBob way darker than anyone realizes. Instead of being a happy-go-lucky cartoon character, he's actually a trapped soul doomed to repeat the same experiences forever, just oblivious enough to keep participating in his own endless punishment. That's genuinely horrifying when you think about it. Let's talk about this crazy theory. What if Sandy Cheeks is actually a government spy sent to study the weird talking sea creatures in Bikini Bottom? Think about it for a second. Sandy's whole setup is way too suspicious to be just some regular scientist doing marine biology research. So Sandy claims she's a scientist from Texas who moved underwater to study sea life. But wait, that makes no sense at all. Real marine biologists don't pack up their entire lives and move to the bottom of the ocean. They study fish from boats and labs on the surface. Why would anyone need to live underwater permanently just to watch fish swim around? Sandy's rocket shows us just how sketchy Sandy's situation really is. She's got a freaking rocket ship in her backyard. Since when do marine biologists need space travel equipment? The technology she has is insane, way beyond what any normal scientist could afford or even get their hands on. We're talking military-grade stuff that would cost millions of dollars. But here's where it gets really weird. Sandy says she's doing research, but what research exactly? Where are her published papers? What university is paying for all this expensive equipment? Who's funding her underwater mansion? Normal scientists have to write grants, publish their work, and collaborate with other researchers. Sandy does none of that because she's a spy. Look at Sandy's skills for a minute. She's an expert fighter, she builds rockets, she knows advanced engineering, and she has access to technology that most countries don't even have. That's someone with serious government training and unlimited funding. The US government would absolutely want to study a place like Bikini Bottom if they knew what was happening there. And what is happening in Bikini Bottom? You've got sea creatures that can talk, think like humans, build cities, and somehow make fire underwater. From a scientific perspective, this would be the biggest discovery in human history. These aren't normal sea animals, they're either super evolved or mutated somehow. Any government would want to figure out how this happened and if they could use it for their own purposes. Sandy's real job becomes obvious when you watch how she acts around everyone. She's constantly observing, taking mental notes, and studying their behavior. She positions herself as the helpful neighbor who always has the perfect solution for every problem. SpongeBob needs help with something, Sandy's got the exact gadget he needs. There's danger in town, Sandy shows up with the perfect weapon or device to handle it. The timing of Sandy showing up is super suspicious too. She arrives right around when SpongeBob starts working at the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob is clearly the weirdest creature in the whole area. A sponge that acts like a human, has unlimited energy, and can do impossible things. If the government was monitoring the ocean and detected something strange, SpongeBob would be the #1 target for study. Sandy's dome is basically the perfect spy base. It's right in the middle of where everyone lives, so she can watch SpongeBob's house, Patrick's rock, and Squidward's place all at the same time. She can monitor all the main subjects while pretending to be their friend. Plus, her dome gives her a secure place to do experiments and probably communicate with her bosses on the surface. What really gives Sandy away is how she handles dangerous situations. Whenever something bad happens in Bikini Bottom, Sandy always knows exactly what to do. She's got backup plans, emergency protocols, and the technical skills to solve any problem. Normal scientists don't have that kind of crisis training, but government agents do. Sandy's constant homesickness makes way more sense if she's actually on a long undercover mission. She's always talking about missing Texas and wanting to go home. That sounds like someone who's burnt out from being away on assignment for too long, not someone who chose to move underwater for fun research. The government would have tons of reasons to want to study Bikini Bottom. Understanding how sea creatures got human intelligence could lead to huge breakthroughs in science and maybe even military uses. They'd want to know if this weirdness is spreading to other parts of the ocean, and they'd definitely be interested in how complex technology works underwater. All of Sandy's expensive equipment makes way more sense if the government gave it to her instead of her buying it herself. No regular scientist could afford a rocket ship, advanced weapons, and a high-tech laboratory. But a secret government research program would have unlimited money for whatever equipment their spy needed. The fact that Sandy can keep her air dome working underwater forever means someone is helping her. She needs constant supplies, equipment maintenance, and logistical support. That kind of backup operation screams government assistance rather than one person working alone. Sandy's fighting skills are another huge red flag. She's a trained combat expert who can beat up multiple opponents at once. Marine biologists don't usually learn advanced martial arts unless they're working for organizations that expect them to face dangerous situations. But let's dig deeper into the evidence from that document about the surveillance operation. Remember how we found out there's this whole network of cameras and monitoring equipment throughout Bikini Bottom? Sandy would be the perfect person to help install and maintain all that spy gear. She's got the technical skills, the access to everyone's homes, and the perfect cover story as a helpful scientist. Think about how often Sandy just happens to show up at the exact right moment when something important is happening. She's there for major events, dangerous situations, and moments when SpongeBob and his friends are doing something scientifically interesting. That's someone who's being kept informed about what's happening so she can gather intelligence. The document also mentions how Sandy calls someone with a French accent the same voice as the narrator who's been documenting everything in Bikini Bottom. This proves Sandy is directly connected to whoever is running the surveillance operation. She's part of a bigger organization that's been watching and documenting everything for years. Sandy's inventions are way too convenient to be coincidental. Every time the plot needs a specific gadget or solution, Sandy just happens to have built exactly what's needed. Time machine? Sandy's got one. Shrinking ray? No problem. Advanced weapons? She can whip those up overnight. Real scientists don't work like that, but government agents with unlimited resources and advanced knowledge of situations do. Her cover story about being from Texas is probably fake too. The government would create a detailed backstory for their operative, complete with a believable hometown and personality. Texas is perfect because it explains her accent, her tough attitude, and her knowledge of land-based technology. Plus, it's far enough from any ocean that nobody in Bikini Bottom would be able to verify her story. Sandy's relationship with SpongeBob is particularly suspicious. She became friends with him really quickly, which is exactly what a trained operative would do to get close to their primary target. SpongeBob is trusting and innocent, making him the perfect subject for long-term study. Sandy can observe his behavior, run experiments on him, and document his abilities all while he thinks she's just being a helpful friend. The fact that Sandy can somehow survive underwater indefinitely while still needing her air helmet is weird when you think about it. Her dome has to have incredibly advanced life support systems that would cost millions to maintain. Where's all that money coming from? How does she get replacement parts and supplies? The only logical answer is that she's got government backing with unlimited resources. Sandy's knowledge of military tactics becomes obvious during episodes where Bikini Bottom faces threats. She always knows how to organize defenses, create weapons, and develop strategic plans. That's not knowledge a marine biologist would have, that's military training. The government probably sent someone with combat experience because they weren't sure what kind of resistance their operative might face. Her scientific equipment is way too advanced for civilian research. The stuff in her lab looks like it belongs in a top-secret government facility, not a personal research station. She's got quantum computers, advanced physics equipment, and technology that probably doesn't even exist in the public sector. This all points to her being supplied by classified government programs. The timing of Sandy's arrival also coincides with when other suspicious things started happening in Bikini Bottom. The increased surveillance, the mysterious background characters who might be other operatives, the weird incidents with humans interfering, it all started around the same time Sandy showed up. She's probably the advanced scout for a much larger operation. Sandy's behavior during the episodes where she interacts with surface world elements is telling too. She never seems surprised by advanced technology or references to the human world above. Most sea creatures would be amazed by surface world stuff. But Sandy acts like she's familiar with it all. That's because she's from that world originally. When you put all this evidence together, Sandy Cheeks looks like one of the most successful undercover agents ever. She's been planted in Bikini Bottom to study what could be the most important scientific discovery in history, all while pretending to be a friendly scientist from Texas. The government is using her to spy on these evolved sea creatures, and SpongeBob and his friends have no clue they're being watched and studied. This theory makes Sandy way more sinister than she appears. Every time she helps SpongeBob, every invention she builds, every friendly conversation, it's all part of her mission to gather intelligence on these creatures. She's been lying to her friends while conducting secret research on them for the government. And the scariest part is how good she is at it. Sandy has completely fooled everyone in Bikini Bottom into thinking she's just a quirky scientist who loves adventure. But in reality, she's a highly trained operative gathering classified information about creatures that could change everything we know about evolution and intelligence. SpongeBob trusts Sandy completely and has no idea his friend is actually studying him like a lab rat for the US government. That's pretty messed up when you think about it. Let's dive into this crazy connection theory. What if Patrick's secret box from The Secret Box actually contains that embarrassing photo of SpongeBob from the Christmas party we see in The Donut of Shame? This theory suggests these two episodes are directly connected through Patrick's habit of keeping SpongeBob's most embarrassing moments as his personal treasures. Think about what we know from both episodes. In The Secret Box, Patrick is super protective of this mysterious box and won't let SpongeBob see what's inside no matter what. He says it contains the most secrety secret of all of Secret Dom, and that if SpongeBob saw it, it would change your life. When SpongeBob finally gets to look inside, all he sees is a piece of string. But then we get the twist ending. Patrick pulls the string after SpongeBob leaves, revealing a secret compartment with an embarrassing photo of SpongeBob at a Christmas party. Now look at The Donut of Shame. The whole episode takes place the morning after SpongeBob's birthday party, which happened to be a tea party that got wild after 8:30 p.m. Patrick wakes up hungover and confused, thinking he stole SpongeBob's donut. But the real kicker is that this party was clearly another one of those crazy get-togethers where embarrassing stuff happened. SpongeBob even videotaped the whole thing just like someone might take photos at a Christmas party. The connection becomes obvious when you realize Patrick has a pattern of collecting embarrassing SpongeBob moments. In The Secret Box, he's got that Christmas party photo hidden away like it's his most prized possession. In The Donut of Shame, we see another party where SpongeBob clearly did embarrassing stuff that got recorded. Patrick's obsession with keeping these moments secret suggests he's been documenting SpongeBob's embarrassing party behavior for a while. What makes this theory really disturbing is Patrick's motivation for keeping these photos. He actively collects and hides embarrassing pictures of his friend. The secret box represents Patrick's twisted hobby of preserving SpongeBob's most vulnerable moments. He's basically keeping blackmail material disguised as friendship keepsakes. The Christmas party photo in the secret box shows SpongeBob in what looks like a compromising or embarrassing situation. Patrick treats this photo like it's incredibly valuable, hiding it in a secret compartment and refusing to let anyone else see it. This suggests the photo shows SpongeBob doing something really embarrassing that Patrick knows would humiliate him if it got out. The Donut of Shame gives us insight into what these parties are actually like. SpongeBob and Patrick have tea parties that apparently get pretty wild after 8:30 p.m. There's enough chaos that Patrick passes out on the ceiling and SpongeBob falls asleep with food in his hand. These aren't innocent kids' tea parties, they're full-blown party sessions where both characters lose control and do embarrassing stuff. The fact that SpongeBob videotapes these parties adds another layer to the theory. If SpongeBob is regularly recording their get-togethers, Patrick probably has access to tons of embarrassing footage and photos. The secret box might not just contain one Christmas party photo, it could be filled with a whole collection of SpongeBob's most embarrassing moments from various parties over the years. Patrick's protective behavior about the box makes way more sense if it contains multiple pieces of compromising material rather than just one photo. He's protecting an entire archive of SpongeBob's party mishaps. This would explain why he's so paranoid about anyone seeing inside and why he considers it his most valuable possession. The timing of both episodes supports this theory too. The secret box aired first, establishing Patrick's secretive behavior about embarrassing SpongeBob content. The Donut of Shame came later and showed us exactly the kind of party situation that would create more material for Patrick's collection. The episodes work together to paint a picture of Patrick as someone who systematically documents and hoards his best friend's embarrassing moments. What's really messed up is how Patrick uses these photos. In the secret box, he looks at the Christmas party photo and laughs, saying, "Merry Christmas, SpongeBob," like he's enjoying SpongeBob's embarrassment. This suggests Patrick gets genuine pleasure from having dirt on his best friend. He's keeping them because he enjoys having power over SpongeBob. The secret string mechanism in the box shows how elaborate Patrick's system is for hiding this stuff. He's put serious thought and effort into concealing these photos, which means this hobby is important to him. Patrick has basically turned embarrassing his best friend into an art form, complete with hidden compartments and secret viewing sessions. This theory also explains Patrick's weird behavior in other episodes. Throughout the series, Patrick often seems to know things about SpongeBob that he shouldn't, or he'll make references to events that seem to embarrass SpongeBob. If Patrick has been secretly collecting compromising material for years, he'd have tons of insider knowledge about SpongeBob's most vulnerable moments. The Christmas party photos specifically suggest these incidents involve SpongeBob drinking or doing other adult activities that would be embarrassing if his other friends found out. SpongeBob tries really hard to maintain his innocent, childlike image, so Patrick having evidence of him acting wild at parties would be devastating if it ever got revealed. What makes this theory particularly dark is the betrayal of trust involved. SpongeBob considers Patrick his best friend and invites him to these private parties where he lets his guard down. Patrick takes advantage of these intimate moments to gather embarrassing material that he then hoards in secret. SpongeBob has no idea his best friend is basically building a blackmail collection against him. The episodes together suggest that Patrick's friendship with SpongeBob has this twisted undercurrent where Patrick gets off on having dirt on his supposedly best friend. Every party they have together becomes another opportunity for Patrick to add to his secret collection of SpongeBob's embarrassing moments. That's a pretty messed up foundation for a friendship when you think about it. Before I tell you about the most interesting theory, make sure you're subscribed. Now let's talk about this really messed up theory. What if each main character in SpongeBob actually represents one of the 7 deadly sins, with SpongeBob being lust, Patrick as sloth, Squidward as wrath, Mr. Krabs as greed, Plankton as envy, and characters like Gary or Mrs. Puff representing gluttony? This theory basically says that Bikini Bottom is like underwater hell, where everyone's stuck living out their worst personality traits forever. Okay, so SpongeBob as lust sounds weird at first, but hear me out. SpongeBob is obsessed with everything in his life to a really unhealthy level. He's completely obsessed with his job in a way that makes everyone around him uncomfortable. The guy gets physically excited about flipping burgers and talks about his spatula like it's his girlfriend or something. Think about how SpongeBob acts around other people, too. He's so desperate for friendship and attention that he basically stalks his neighbors. Squidward tells him to go away constantly, but SpongeBob just keeps coming back, like someone who can't take a hint. He forces his affection on people whether they want it or not, which is pretty much what lust is all about, wanting something so badly that you don't care about boundaries. SpongeBob's love for things is so intense it crosses into creepy territory. He literally makes out with his house, he gets way too excited about jellyfishing, and he acts like every little thing in his life is the most amazing thing ever. That's obsessive behavior that looks a lot like lust, just directed at objects and activities instead of people. Patrick as Sloth is probably the most obvious one here. This guy literally lives under a rock and spends his entire life sleeping, watching TV, or sitting around doing absolutely nothing. He's too lazy to get a job, too lazy to clean his house, and honestly, too lazy to even think most of the time. Patrick represents giving up on life completely. But Patrick's laziness goes way deeper than just being physically lazy. He's also mentally lazy. He refuses to learn anything new or put any effort into improving himself. He's perfectly happy being stupid and useless, which is exactly what sloth is about. It's not just being tired, it's not caring enough to try at anything. Patrick has completely given up on being a functioning person. Squidward as Wrath is so perfect, it's scary. This guy is angry about literally everything: his job, his neighbors, his life, his lack of success as an artist. Squidward lives in a constant state of rage and bitterness, and he takes it out on everyone around him. Even when people are trying to be nice to him, he responds with anger and meanness. Squidward can't enjoy anything because he's too busy being mad about what he doesn't have. His art sucks, his clarinet playing is terrible, but instead of trying to get better, he just gets angrier at the world for not recognizing his talent. He's basically trapped in this cycle of rage, where everything makes him more bitter and angry. Mr. Krabs' greed is so obvious it's almost boring. The guy is literally obsessed with money to the point where it's his entire personality. He cares more about making a profit than anything else: his employees' safety, his customers' happiness, or even basic human decency. Mr. Krabs will do absolutely anything for money, but it's not just that Mr. Krabs likes money, he's actually addicted to it. He gets physically excited when he sees cash, he talks to money like it's alive, and he's willing to put people in danger just to save a few bucks. He's turned greed into an art form where money becomes more important than people's lives. Plankton as Envy makes total sense when you think about it. His entire existence is about wanting what Mr. Krabs has: the successful restaurant, the secret formula, the customers, the respect. Plankton can't be happy with his own life because he's constantly looking at what other people have and getting jealous. Plankton's whole villain thing is about proving he's better than Mr. Krabs. All his schemes and inventions are just ways to try to beat his former friend. He's so focused on what he doesn't have that he completely wastes his actual talents and intelligence on stupid revenge plots. The gluttony thing is trickier, but let's look at Gary and Mrs. Puff. Gary might represent gluttony for attention and care rather than just food. He demands constant feeding, attention, and love from SpongeBob, and throws tantrums when he doesn't get what he wants. Gary's basically a glutton for affection. Mrs. Puff could be gluttonous for peace and quiet. She's so desperate to avoid the chaos that SpongeBob brings that she'll do anything: cheat on tests, lie to authorities, even try to get SpongeBob hurt just to satisfy her craving for a normal, peaceful life. She's addicted to the idea of not having to deal with SpongeBob's craziness. What makes this theory really dark is that none of these characters ever change or grow. They're stuck in their sins forever. SpongeBob will always be obsessively lustful, Patrick will always be lazy, Squidward will always be angry, and so on. No matter what happens in any episode, they always go right back to being the same sinful person by the next episode. The show's structure actually supports this theory because nothing ever has lasting consequences. The characters can't escape their roles because they represent these eternal human flaws rather than real people who can learn and change. They're trapped in this underwater prison where their sins feed off each other and create endless conflict. SpongeBob's lust annoys Squidward's wrath, Patrick's laziness enables everyone's bad behavior, Mr. Krabs' greed exploits all of them, and Plankton's envy drives him to constantly mess with their lives. They're all stuck together in this community where their worst traits just make each other worse. This theory basically turns SpongeBob from a fun kids show into this dark story about how people get trapped by their worst impulses and can't escape. Every episode becomes an example of how these character flaws create problems when people refuse to work on themselves or change. The most disturbing part is that most of the characters seem pretty happy with their lives, which means they've basically accepted being terrible people and given up on trying to be better. They're content living in their spiritual prison because they either don't know better or don't want to put in the effort to change. Let's examine this seriously disturbing theory. What if Mrs. Puff is actually in witness protection, which would explain her extreme paranoia and references to constantly changing her identity? For those who don't know, witness protection is when the government gives someone a completely new identity and relocates them to keep them safe after they've testified against dangerous criminals. This theory suggests Mrs. Puff is a federal witness hiding from people who want her dead. Think about Mrs. Puff's behavior throughout the series, but especially in No Free Rides. Most driving instructors would just be frustrated with a bad student like SpongeBob. They might get annoyed, maybe even quit their job. But Mrs. Puff's reaction goes way beyond normal teacher stress. She shows signs of genuine terror and panic that suggest she's dealing with way bigger problems than just a clumsy student. In No Free Rides, when Mrs. Puff realizes she's given SpongeBob his license, she has a complete mental breakdown and says something really revealing. "I'll have to move to a new city, start a new boating school with a new name. No, not again." That phrase, "not again," is huge because it means Mrs. Puff has already done this before multiple times. Normal people don't just pack up and move to new cities with new identities when they make work mistakes. That's something you do when you're running from danger. Mrs. Puff has clearly had to abandon her life and start over before, which is exactly what happens in witness protection when your cover gets blown or you feel unsafe. Her fear about SpongeBob getting his license makes way more sense if she's in hiding. SpongeBob driving badly would attract attention from police, news reporters, and government agencies. In the episode, Mrs. Puff imagines news crews covering the destruction SpongeBob causes. If you're trying to stay hidden from dangerous people, the last thing you want is your town all over the news with you as the driving instructor who caused the chaos. Mrs. Puff's paranoia levels are way beyond what any normal person would experience. She constantly inflates when stressed, which could be a trauma response from whatever dangerous situation put her in witness protection originally. People who've been threatened or attacked often develop these kinds of physical stress reactions that get triggered by anything that reminds them of the original danger. The way Mrs. Puff talks about changing her name and moving away sounds exactly like someone who's already been through the witness protection process. She knows the routine: new city, new identity, new job. Most people would never think of completely erasing their identity and starting over somewhere else. But for someone in witness protection, that's just standard procedure when things go wrong. Mrs. Puff's job as a driving instructor actually makes perfect sense for someone in witness protection. It's a low-profile job that doesn't require extensive background checks or federal licensing. You can probably start a driving school in a small town like Bikini Bottom without too much scrutiny from authorities. It's the kind of job the government would set up for someone who needs to blend into a community quietly. Her house and lifestyle also fit the witness protection profile. Mrs. Puff lives alone, doesn't seem to have any family or close friends in town, and keeps a very low profile. People in witness protection are usually told to avoid forming deep relationships or drawing attention to themselves. Mrs. Puff's isolated lifestyle could be part of her protective cover. The really disturbing part is thinking about what Mrs. Puff might have witnessed that was so serious she needed federal protection. Witness protection is typically reserved for people who have information about major organized crime, terrorism, or high-level government corruption. Mrs. Puff could have seen murders, drug operations, or other serious criminal activity that powerful people would kill to keep secret. Her extreme reaction to any kind of attention or publicity makes sense if there are dangerous criminals actively looking for her. Every time SpongeBob causes chaos that might attract media attention, Mrs. Puff probably worries that her enemies will see her on the news and track her down. She's afraid of losing her life. The fact that Mrs. Puff keeps taking SpongeBob back as a student despite all the problems he causes could be part of her cover. If she suddenly quit teaching or moved away right after SpongeBob started causing problems, it might look suspicious. People in witness protection have to maintain their fake identities, even when it's really difficult or dangerous. Mrs. Puff's relationship with law enforcement in the show is also interesting. She gets arrested multiple times, but always seems to get released quickly. This could be because the local police have been told by federal agents to go easy on her, or because she has some kind of special protection status that regular criminals don't get. The inflation thing becomes really dark when you think about it as a trauma response. If Mrs. Puff witnessed something really violent or terrifying, her body might have developed this defensive mechanism where she literally makes herself bigger when she feels threatened. It's like her fight or flight response got permanently damaged by whatever she went through before. What makes this theory especially scary is that it means Mrs. Puff is living in constant fear for her life. Every day she has to worry that today might be the day her enemies find her. Every time SpongeBob causes a scene that might get attention, she's probably wondering if this is what finally gets her killed. The witness protection theory also explains why Mrs. Puff seems so much more serious and adult than most other characters in the show. She's dealing with real-world adult problems like staying alive and avoiding dangerous criminals. While everyone else in Bikini Bottom gets to live in this innocent cartoon world, Mrs. Puff is carrying the weight of whatever horrible things she witnessed. If this theory is true, then Mrs. Puff is a traumatized person trying to survive in hiding while dangerous criminals are potentially hunting her. That transforms every episode with her from comedy into something much darker. The story of someone desperately trying to maintain their cover while dealing with a student who keeps threatening to blow their protection. The scariest part is that SpongeBob has no idea he might be putting Mrs. Puff's life in danger every time he causes chaos that could expose her identity. He thinks he's just learning to drive, but he could actually be getting his teacher killed. Let's talk about this really dark theory. What if Gary the Snail is actually SpongeBob's only connection to reality and the thing keeping him sane? This theory says Gary is more like a therapy animal whose job is to stop SpongeBob from completely losing his mind. Look at how Gary acts in Gary Takes a Bath, and you'll see what I mean. Most people think Gary is just being a stubborn pet who doesn't want to get clean. But watch closer, Gary is actually trying to stop SpongeBob from having a complete mental breakdown. SpongeBob's behavior gets crazier and crazier throughout the episode, and Gary keeps trying to calm him down or redirect him. SpongeBob starts normal enough, just trying to get his pet to take a bath, but then he straps a bomb to his chest and threatens to blow himself up if Gary doesn't cooperate. That's the actions of someone who's mentally unstable. Gary doesn't react to the bomb threat because he knows it's not real, and he's trying to show SpongeBob that his dramatic threats are just in his head. Then SpongeBob tries to use subliminal messages to brainwash Gary, which is completely insane. The creepy girl image that pops up might be SpongeBob's broken mind bleeding through his attempted mind control. Gary just ignores all this because he's smart enough to see that SpongeBob is having some kind of episode. Gary's intelligence throughout the series is way too advanced for a normal snail. He can read, write, use machines, and understand complex ideas. This suggests Gary might not be a regular pet at all, but some kind of guardian assigned to keep SpongeBob stable. His high intelligence lets him predict when SpongeBob is about to do something dangerous and stop him before it gets too bad. The French restaurant scene is really dark when you think about it this way. SpongeBob calls a French restaurant because they eat snails, basically threatening to have Gary cooked if he doesn't behave. SpongeBob is threatening to kill his own psychological support system, which would leave him completely crazy with no one to keep him grounded. Throughout the episode, Gary consistently outsmarts all of SpongeBob's attempts to control him. The gramophone trick where Gary records his own meowing to fool SpongeBob shows he understands exactly how SpongeBob's mind works. Gary can predict SpongeBob's reactions because he's been managing SpongeBob's mental health for a long time. The ending is the most telling part. SpongeBob ends up needing the bath after falling in mud, and Gary supervises him taking it. This shows that Gary is actually the responsible one in their relationship. He's the caretaker, making sure SpongeBob takes care of basic things like hygiene. SpongeBob acts like a kid being watched by a parent when he says, yeah, Gary, I'm getting behind my ears." This theory explains why Gary always seems to be the voice of reason when SpongeBob gets carried away with crazy ideas. Gary's meowing is trying to warn SpongeBob about dangers and bad ideas. SpongeBob usually ignores Gary's warnings and ends up in trouble, which proves Gary was trying to help. Gary can take care of himself when he needs to, like when he runs away in other episodes. This shows he's not actually dependent on SpongeBob like a normal pet would be. Gary chooses to stay with SpongeBob because he has an important job keeping him sane, not because he needs food and shelter. Gary stays calm during SpongeBob's most manic episodes, while other characters get frustrated or scared. This is exactly how a therapy animal would behave, patient and focused on keeping their person safe. Gary has experience dealing with SpongeBob's mental health problems. When SpongeBob absorbs all the bathwater and starts spraying it everywhere like a maniac, Gary doesn't panic or get angry. He just cleverly evades SpongeBob's attacks and sets up the gramophone trick to confuse him. This shows Gary has developed specific strategies for dealing with SpongeBob's episodes. He knows that getting angry or fighting back would only make SpongeBob worse, so he uses misdirection and patience instead. The way SpongeBob talks to Gary during his manic phase is also revealing. He starts making terrible puns and acting like everything is a game, even though his behavior is increasingly violent and erratic. This suggests SpongeBob's mind is trying to reframe his breakdown as something fun and harmless. Gary's job is to ride out these episodes without escalating them. Gary's decision to steal the ladder and leave SpongeBob stuck in the tree is actually a brilliant therapeutic intervention. By removing SpongeBob's ability to continue his manic behavior, Gary forces him to calm down and think about what he's doing. When SpongeBob starts yelling threats from the tree, Gary calmly leads him toward the mud puddle, knowing exactly what will happen. The really dark part is that SpongeBob probably has no idea about his mental health issues. He thinks Gary is just a regular pet who sometimes doesn't listen, but Gary is actually working constantly to prevent SpongeBob from hurting himself or others. SpongeBob's happy, childlike behavior might be a coping mechanism that Gary helps him maintain. Episodes where Gary gets sick or disappears often show SpongeBob making worse decisions and acting more erratic. This supports the idea that Gary's presence is crucial for keeping SpongeBob mentally stable. Without his reality anchor, SpongeBob starts losing his grip on sanity immediately. The most disturbing thing about this theory is that it suggests SpongeBob's entire life is built around managing serious mental illness. His simple job, his isolated house, his childish behavior, all of this could be part of a structured environment designed to keep him functional. Gary is the most important part of this system, the one thing that keeps SpongeBob from completely losing it. If this theory is true, then every episode where Gary tries to guide or warn SpongeBob becomes much darker. Gary is literally trying to save SpongeBob from the consequences of his own unstable mind. When SpongeBob ignores these warnings and gets hurt, it shows how much he needs Gary's guidance to survive in the real world. This theory makes Gary into a tragic character, an intelligent being who's given up his own life to keep someone else mentally stable. Gary's loyalty is a sense of duty to prevent SpongeBob from going completely insane. Every time Gary stops SpongeBob from doing something dangerous, he's essentially saving SpongeBob's life. The scariest part is thinking about what would happen to SpongeBob if Gary ever wasn't there to anchor him to reality. Without Gary's constant guidance and intervention, SpongeBob might completely lose touch with the real world and become a danger to himself and everyone around him. Before I tell you about this sad theory, make sure to subscribe. Now let's dive into this really messed up theory. What if SpongeBob is always nice to Squidward because he secretly knows that he's Squidward's only friend, and SpongeBob can't handle the guilt of abandoning someone who would be completely alone without him? This theory suggests that SpongeBob's relentless pursuit of Squidward's friendship comes from a deep understanding that Squidward is desperately lonely and has no one else in his life. Look at Cephalopod Lodge, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. SpongeBob notices that Squidward is actually happy for once, which is so unusual that it immediately catches his attention. Most people would just be glad their grumpy coworker is having a good day, but SpongeBob becomes obsessed with figuring out why Squidward is happy. This shows that SpongeBob pays incredibly close attention to Squidward's emotional state, almost like he's monitoring someone he's worried about. When SpongeBob and Patrick follow Squidward to the Cephalopod Lodge, they discover the one thing in Squidward's life that actually brings him joy, his secret club with other cephalopods. This is literally the only place where Squidward fits in and feels accepted. The episode reveals that this lodge meeting only happens once a month on the third Wednesday, which means Squidward gets to feel happy and included exactly 12 times per year. The rest of the time, he's miserable and alone. SpongeBob accidentally gets Squidward kicked out of this lodge, destroying the one source of happiness and social connection in Squidward's entire life. Most people would feel bad about this, but SpongeBob's reaction goes way beyond normal guilt. He becomes absolutely desperate to fix the situation, going to extreme lengths to get Squidward back into the lodge. This suggests SpongeBob understands on some level that he just destroyed Squidward's only lifeline to happiness. The really dark part is when Squidward says, "The last thing in my life I really enjoyed," and SpongeBob ruined it too. That word "too" is crucial because it implies SpongeBob has ruined other things that made Squidward happy. SpongeBob has been systematically destroying Squidward's attempts at finding joy and fulfillment, probably without even realizing it. But now SpongeBob might be starting to understand the pattern, and when SpongeBob and Patrick try to apologize to the lodge members, they completely fail because they can't take responsibility for their actions. Patrick even tries to blame Roger for letting them in. This shows that SpongeBob and Patrick don't really understand the gravity of what they've done. But SpongeBob's continued desperation to fix things suggests he's starting to grasp how isolated Squidward really is. The Feather Friends Club that SpongeBob creates is revealing because it shows SpongeBob's understanding that Squidward needs some kind of social group to belong to. SpongeBob can't just leave Squidward alone after destroying his real club. He has to create a replacement, even though it's obviously inferior. This suggests SpongeBob realizes that without some form of social connection, Squidward would be completely isolated. Squidward's reaction to the Feather Friends shows just how desperate he is for any kind of belonging. Even though the chicken suits are ridiculous and the secret handshake is just patty cake, Squidward initially goes along with it because he has literally nothing else. When he finally rejects it, you can see how crushed he is to lose even this pathetic substitute for real friendship. The sock plan that SpongeBob comes up with to get Squidward back into the lodge is incredibly elaborate and risky. SpongeBob is willing to dress up as a giant eel and potentially get himself and Patrick kicked out of places too, just to restore Squidward's social connection. This level of commitment suggests SpongeBob understands that Squidward's happiness depends entirely on having somewhere to belong. What makes this theory really dark is that it explains SpongeBob's behavior throughout the entire series. SpongeBob never gives up on Squidward no matter how mean or rejecting Squidward is, because SpongeBob knows that he's literally all Squidward has. If SpongeBob stopped trying to be Squidward's friend, Squidward would have absolutely no one. That's a huge burden for SpongeBob to carry. The Lodge episode shows that when Squidward does find his own social group, he's actually capable of being happy and fulfilled. But these opportunities are rare and fragile. Most of the time, SpongeBob and Patrick are the only people who show any interest in spending time with Squidward, even though Squidward clearly doesn't want their company. This creates a twisted dynamic where SpongeBob feels obligated to keep pursuing Squidward's friendship, because abandoning him would be cruel. SpongeBob probably realizes that his annoying behavior drives other people away from Squidward, making Squidward even more dependent on SpongeBob's attention. It's like SpongeBob is trapped in a cycle where he has to keep bothering Squidward because he's the one who made Squidward so isolated in the first place. The really disturbing part is that SpongeBob might be unconsciously sabotaging Squidward's other relationships to maintain this dependency. By following Squidward to the Lodge and ruining his membership, this forces Squidward back into depending on SpongeBob and Patrick for any human interaction, even though that interaction is unwanted. Throughout the series, we see that Squidward has no close friends, no romantic relationships, and a strained relationship with his family. His co-workers at the Krusty Krab are literally the only people who pay attention to him on a regular basis. SpongeBob probably recognizes this and feels responsible for making sure Squidward doesn't become completely isolated. This theory suggests that SpongeBob's relentless friendliness towards Squidward comes from guilt and obligation rather than genuine affection. SpongeBob keeps bothering Squidward because he knows that without this attention, Squidward would have no social contact at all. It's like SpongeBob is providing a social service for someone who can't maintain relationships on their own. The end of Cephalopod Lodge is particularly cruel because SpongeBob gets Squidward's hopes up by temporarily restoring his Lodge membership, only to immediately destroy it again by revealing himself. This shows the cycle that Squidward is trapped, and any happiness or social connection he finds gets ruined by SpongeBob's interference, leaving him more dependent on SpongeBob than ever. If this theory is true, then SpongeBob's friendship with Squidward is based on pity and guilt rather than mutual enjoyment. SpongeBob can't leave Squidward alone because he knows Squidward would be completely friendless without him. That's more like a caretaker relationship where SpongeBob feels obligated to provide social contact to someone who can't get it anywhere else. The most disturbing aspect is that this dynamic probably makes both characters miserable. Squidward is stuck receiving unwanted attention from someone he doesn't like, and SpongeBob is stuck feeling responsible for the emotional well-being of someone who openly rejects him. Neither of them can escape because SpongeBob won't abandon Squidward, and Squidward can't find friends anywhere else. This theory transforms SpongeBob from an innocent, friendly character into someone who's trapped by his own sense of responsibility for Squidward's loneliness. Every time SpongeBob bothers Squidward, he's essentially acting as a substitute for the real friendships that Squidward can't seem to form or maintain on his own. Let's talk about this really dark theory. What if the rivalry between the Krusty Krab and Chum Bucket actually represents the brutal reality of how big businesses destroy smaller competitors through dirty tactics and market manipulation? This theory suggests that what looks like a silly cartoon rivalry is actually showing us how corporate competition really works in the real world. Look at the algae's always greener and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. When Plankton switches lives with Mr. Krabs, we get to see both sides of this business war. Mr. Krabs calls Plankton his arch competitor, like corporate speak for a business rival. The way Mr. Krabs treats Plankton shows how big corporations deal with smaller competitors. He calls Plankton just a dirty little man and flicks him away like he's nothing. This is exactly how big businesses treat small companies. They act like they don't matter until they become a threat, then they crush them completely. When Plankton takes over as Mr. Plankton, we see what happens when the roles flip. Suddenly, Plankton has all the corporate power, the money, the successful restaurant, the employees, the fame. He even has business awards on his wall and gets featured in Clams magazine, which is obviously making fun of Time or Forbes. This shows how business success creates more success through media attention and prestige. But here's where it gets really messed up. Plankton can't handle being the successful businessman because he doesn't understand the human cost. When alternate SpongeBob begs for his performance review, Plankton casually tells him he's using too much sauce. This tiny criticism completely destroys SpongeBob's confidence and sends him into a mental breakdown. This is exactly what happens in real companies when managers make arbitrary criticism that ruins workers' self-esteem. The promotion scene is even worse. When Plankton randomly promotes SpongeBob to co-cashier, it causes chaos in the workplace. Squidward gets mad about sharing his position, Pearl demands more allowance money, and customers start complaining about bad service. This shows how corporate decisions made without thinking can destroy workplace relationships and customer satisfaction. What makes this theory really disturbing is how it shows the personal cost of business competition. In the alternate universe, Krabs becomes the desperate competitor trying to steal the formula. He's described as someone who crawled out from the lowest trench in the ocean and the most hated creature in Bikini Bottom. This represents how failed business owners get treated like criminals by society. The fact that alternate Krabs is naked shows how business failure strips people of their dignity and basic needs. He can't even afford clothes, but he's still trying to steal the formula because it's his only chance at survival. This represents how economic desperation forces people into illegal or unethical behavior just to survive. The victory screech that happens when Krabs gets defeated represents how businesses celebrate destroying their competitors. Everyone in the Krusty Krab cheers when Krabs fails to steal the formula, just like how corporations celebrate when they drive competitors out of business. There's no sympathy for the guy who failed, just celebration of their own success. Krabs' promise to come back tomorrow and the next day shows how relentless business competition really is. He's not going to give up trying to steal the formula because he has no other options for survival. This represents how small businesses have to keep fighting against bigger competitors even when they're clearly losing, because giving up means complete failure. The phone call where Krabs keeps saying "and the next day" represents how constant competitive pressure can drive business owners crazy. Plankton starts sweating and panicking because he realizes this harassment will never end. This is exactly what happens in real corporate warfare. Companies use lawsuits, price wars, and other tactics to psychologically pressure their competitors until they break. Plankton's final breakdown, where he screams, "It's not worth it," and rips off his corporate clothes, shows how the stress of being a successful business owner can be overwhelming. He'd rather go back to eating fake meatloaf than deal with the constant pressure of employees, customers, and competitors. This represents how many business owners burn out from the stress of running companies. The really dark part is how the episode shows that both sides of corporate competition are miserable. Mr. Krabs in the regular universe is paranoid and greedy, constantly worried about protecting his formula and profits. Plankton in the regular universe is desperate and bitter, constantly failing to compete. Neither character is actually happy, they're both trapped in this cycle of corporate warfare. The holographic meatloaf that Plankton eats at the end represents how people convince themselves to be satisfied with less rather than deal with the stress of competition. Plankton decides that fake food is better than real success, if it means avoiding the psychological cost of business ownership. Throughout the series, we see this corporate warfare playing out in different ways. Mr. Krabs constantly exploits his workers by paying them almost nothing while making huge profits. He's willing to endanger customers and employees to save money or increase profits. This represents how corporations prioritize profit over people every single time. Plankton, meanwhile, uses increasingly desperate and illegal tactics to try to compete. He builds robots, uses mind control, and even tries to destroy the Krusty Krab. This represents how small businesses sometimes resort to unethical tactics when they can't compete legitimately against bigger corporations with more resources. The fact that both restaurants serve basically the same product, burgers, shows how corporate competition often happens between companies that are selling essentially the same thing. The only difference is that Mr. Krabs has the secret formula, which represents proprietary technology or trade secrets that give one company an unfair advantage over everyone else. The customers in Bikini Bottom don't really care about the rivalry, they just want good food at reasonable prices. But they get caught in the middle of this corporate war, sometimes getting bad service or dangerous products, because the businesses are more focused on fighting each other than actually serving customers properly. This theory transforms SpongeBob from an innocent workplace comedy into a dark commentary on capitalism. Every episode about the Krusty Krab versus Chum Bucket rivalry becomes a story about how business competition destroys people's lives and mental health. The characters are representations of different types of businesses and workers trapped in an economic system that forces them to fight each other for survival. The most disturbing part is that the show presents this corporate warfare as normal and even funny, just like how our society treats the brutal competition that destroys small businesses and exploits workers as just how business works. We're supposed to root for Mr. Krabs because he's successful, even though his success comes at the cost of everyone around him being miserable. That's the end of today's video. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, and I hope you enjoyed.